I think I'm still. Okay, yeah. Okay, we're live. Morning, everyone. If you're watching the live stream and you were thinking of coming in person, you'll notice that we're at the First Unitarian Church this week only, so make sure you come to the right place. It's the First Unitarian Church at 21st and Chestnut. But it's the week before our event next week, celebrating James Baldwin's centenary, and which is at the Church of the Crucifixion on Friday and Saturday, August 2nd and August 3rd, with the Monday event, August 5th, being at the Parkway Central Branch of the Free Library. So today, why we're going to first talk about the deepening political crisis, and then we will, after that discussion, we will talk about preparations for the big 3-day event next week, which we're really excited for. So it should be pretty exciting for the school. But without further ado, I'll hand it over to Dr. Montero first to cover the discussion on the deepening political crisis. I know you get more of the heavy work. We're talking about assassinations and coups and the U.S. state. So I'll hand it over to Dr. Montero.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Emily. I think as we prepare for next week, we have to be anchored to what is going on in the country and in the world. And kind of starting with July 13th, things began to take on a different complexion politically. July 13th was the attempted assassination of Donald Trump at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. 2 days later, the Republican National Convention began, where he was received as a conquering hero, obviously, for his delegates. It was, I guess, emotional, and because he could have been killed. I mean, with all of the talk by the FBI that was it shrapnel or was it a bullet, whatever, the fact of the matter is it was a serious assassination attempt. It was not unexpected. People had been saying that if they could not, that is the ruling elite, if they could not stop him through the legal cases, if he could not be smeared through all of the things that were going on in the media and so on, that they would have to attempt to assassinate him or assassinate him. And it was not unexpected for him, nor any of us. It was miraculous that he was not killed, that he arose from it almost with a heroic stance, saying to his people, fight, 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 which had become almost a defining quality of his campaign from the time that he announced. And this defiance, more than anything else, defines his candidacy and makes him an arch enemy of the ruling elite. The defiance and how he inspires that same spirit within the people who are his most ardent followers. We cannot underestimate that. Actually, there has never been, don't let me say never, I don't know every instance, but there's not been in recent history, maybe the last 100, maybe 150 years, there has never been a presidential candidacy, a major candidacy, a candidate who can win, where the essence of their campaign is defiant against the ruling elite. And that is why They have tried to criminalize him. They have associated him, or attempted to associate him with the worst enemies, quote unquote, of the United States. It's almost tantamount to a Communist Party candidate back at the height of the Cold War. Because the Communist Party is associated with the Soviet Union, with the World Socialist and Liberation Forces, all of whom were defined as enemies of the United States. For a Communist Party candidate, let us say, to be running a campaign where he's leading in the polls, in spite of the fact that the ruling elite have defined him as an ally of dictators and autocrats around the world. I mean, it's just an extraordinary situation. So it was not unexpected. We have talked about the 1960s and that era of assassinations. And it's hard to recreate it in words. But in fact, to see a president, three major civil rights leaders, and a major candidate for the presidency, all assassinated in one decade. It's like, the knives were out. And so assassination as a political tool and weapon is not unknown to American presidential politics. So this was not abnormal or unusual. It was expected. This is the way the deep state, the permanent state, if you will, operates in this country. We should have no illusions about it. This ceased to be a democracy decades ago. And Trump is the first and only major candidate to defy and step to the deep state and its agencies, including the CIA, the FBI, national intelligence, the military, and so it has never been done. And to have this level of support has never been seen. So you can see what the equation was, what the calculus was, and what the deep state had to do in defense of the state. That's why, we kind of titled today Assassination, Coups, and the State. Unless the state as a set of institutions that guarantee the rule of the ruling class is factored in, you can't understand anything. But for Trump to emerge as he had and was extraordinary, phenomenal in the history of politics. And here we are addressing now the qualities of the individual, this man, this phenomenon, this political movement. You see what I'm saying? Everything else, it seems to me, about what he said about this or what he said about the other thing, because he says contradictory things about most things. The mainstream media says, well, he lied 38 times. That's all he does is lie, lie, lie. And you stupid people believe him. You don't care about the lie, the big lie that the election was. You know what I'm saying? It's almost, how do you say, hilarious that they keep saying it, but it gets no traction. You know what I'm saying? And they're not accustomed to that. The ruling elite believe that with their vast mechanisms of propaganda and information and ideological control, that whatever they say, you believe, and you are to assume that they are telling the truth because they said it. Well, the tables have been flipped. People believe now, a good number of people believe that the mainstream media does nothing but lie. You see what I'm saying? There's no trust, there's no anything in there. So here you have this guy who just by less than a quarter of an inch escaped a bullet to his skull, which, if not killing him, would have incapacitated him and changed the direction of the 2024 election. They would have, by assassination, solved the Trump problem. And going a week forward, Biden would never have dropped out. See what I'm saying? But he emerges. 2 days later, he appears at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, unbowed, proud, and again, Donald Trump. And he won't change who he is. He will not change. And this is very interesting. He had a bandage on his ear. He was obviously shaken. He had to be, because he was looking death in the face. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? He knew it was coming, but it's still unexpected. And he chooses J.D. Vance as his vice president. None of the neocon Republicans, no Lindsey Graham, no Marco Rubio, no Cruz, no this long line, no Nikki Haley's, none of the neocons who are, in terms of the American empire, on the same side as the neocons that run the Democratic Party. So he chose, going forward, not to be hamstrung by enemies of his, as was the case in his first administration. And we've talked about J.D. Vance. You know, Jeremiah did a wonderful job in talking about Orrin Pass. And you know, when we look at that, we see not only vice president, but a different ideological framing of the presidency of Donald Trump if he wins, and a rejection of the neocon project, which upsets the Western ruling classes around the world, including in Israel. And then he comes out and says, I will not militarily defend Taiwan. Taiwan is a rich country, defend yourself. Which is very interesting. So this is quite significant. So he gives his speech on Thursday. The mainstream media says, well, the first 20 minutes were good. He was a unifying figure. And then after that, it was Donald Trump all over again. And I have a friend who was at the Republican Party convention who was a reporter there. I won't name him at this point. But so we talked, and he came back. Oh, it was nothing but a cult fest. It was just a cult. It was just this. It was just that. I said, well, what you were looking at, and maybe you didn't understand it, was that a movement from the grassroots took over the Republican Party. A movement took over a party. Now, we had one other instance similar to this in 1854, where a movement, soon to be named the Republican Party, created a party, a movement of free soilers, small farmers, and anti the expansion of slavery into Illinois, Kansas, and other places, create their own party, and in 1860 win the presidency, and that's Abraham Lincoln. This is an instance of a movement taking over a party. People say, well, Nikki Haley had called him everything but a child of God. J.D. Vance had said he's the closest thing to Hitler we've ever seen. And Marco Rubio, and he had said that Ted Cruz's father was involved in the assassination of Kennedy. And by the way, he had an ugly wife and all that, you know. You know what I'm saying? That he had said all of these things that violate polite political discourse among elites.
Right.
He treats the elite with utter contempt. We've never seen it before. He therefore must be a fascist. He doesn't respect our, quote, institutions of democracy, or we who control those institutions. So he has to be a Nazi, a fascist, an authoritarian, a dick, everything but a child of God. And this is the attack upon one who would have the audacity to attack the ruling class, personally and in other ways, and show no respect for them, and say to tens of millions of Americans, this is not a democracy. The legal system is not impartial. The people that run these institutions are not worthy of your respect. And I'm going to be an exemplar of the contempt that you should have for them. That's what we're looking at. And when Nikki Haley and DeSantis, and I don't know if Mitch McConnell, well, see, he got dementia too, so he might not have given a speech. But when Nikki Haley, who called him everything, gets up there and bows down, when all of the rest of them bow down, they're not so much bowing down to him, but they realize that the party whose name they run under is not the party of George W. Bush, of Liz Cheney, and so on. It is a different party. Now, of course, because in preschool, we've been following these things almost at a granular level for months. You know, when hardly anyone was taking any of this seriously, we were looking at it, the forces. Matter of fact, we were going to rallies when RFK came here to announce his independent run. Matter of fact, some of y'all got photos with them. And that's even if you wanted to. And Michelle talk about, oh, he's tight. He got but we have since changed our opinion of him but anyway.
Yeah. Oh.
But we were at the launch of the what is it? Was it the dump Biden? What is it? Abandoned Biden. Of the Arab Americans and Palestinians and different things. We were trying to follow this and to understand it. You know, we came up at one time with a triad of opposition. I don't know how that didn't hold up too well, but it wasn't our fault. But anyway, we've been following this at a granular level and connecting the year of Baldwin and other things that we do to this political movement in the country. At that time, most people were not paying this close attention, and they didn't have to, but we had to, for obvious reasons. Trump gives a speech. And I said to my friend, I said, no, man, every movement of the people takes on that quality of a Pentecostal church service, an evangelical movement. Many of the people in it, ordinary people, elevate the leader to almost a something extraordinary. That always happens. On one side, it does represent a lack of full ideological development of the people, but on the other side, it is, I don't know, ordinary people elevate leaders like that. It was in the Soviet Union. That's the way Stalin was seen. People say, well, he created a cult of the personality. Maybe he didn't create, maybe it was created by the people, you know? And he just adapted to it. Oh, you see me as a cult of the personality? I guess I am that, you know? But this is a movement with all of the passions and angers, joys and disappointments of people's movement, all of the stuff that people bring from their lives, you know, and the people are not happy. And this outpouring of passion for Trump was their recognition. Y'all tried to kill him. That's what you saw. And I kept telling you, you were just looking at the surface. You got to look deeper. You got to understand people. You have to do sociology for change. After the convention, which ended on Thursday with Trump's speech, 3 days later, Biden announces, I'm not. He didn't announce it. He put a letter on X. Now, he don't use X. Or as they say, X, Twitter X. He don't use that. He ain't never used it. You know what I'm saying? Facebook, he don't roll like that. And then the letter, you know he didn't write it. And then the signature was not his signature. It was a digitized signature. You see what I'm saying? So it was a manufactured, and so here you had, with the assassination attempt, an attempted coup, a failed coup d'etat. I call it a coup because with it, the opposition to Biden would have been rendered null and void. It would no longer exist. The Republican Party would be left with maybe a Nikki Haley, but nobody of consequence. That would have been a coup d'etat. You see? But then there was a second coup d'etat that was successful. And, you know, it had been, you know, in one sense, a death by 1,000 cuts, you know, every day, another stab. The guy is bleeding, but you don't even know he's dying. And everybody's coming out against him, threatening to come out against him. People, it's reported, leaks in the newspaper. Well, you know, so and so went to him and said, "You need to get out." His son Hunter is saying you need to stay in. Then they connected that to the vials of cocaine they found in the West Wing. You know, Hunter is a recovering crack addict, and he may have, you know, fallen back into addiction. You never know. But nonetheless, cocaine was in the West Wing. You know? Now, I don't want to connect the dots and be conspiracy theorizing at this point, but it is a point of great humor, to put it lightly. But I call the second coup, the successful one, a panic of the donor class. The donor class is the ruling class. When they began to hold money from the campaign, and they openly said, "We got $90 million, we hold it from Biden." At that point, he's done. because it's going to take, even with Kamala Harris, it's going to take at least $2 billion of advertising to define Harris and to, from their point of view, define Trump, therefore defining the ideological and political landscape. He steps down on the Sunday, I think it's 20th, and says that he is backing Kamala Harris. A risky move at best. You take all the calculations. It's a risky move in a desperate situation. Time is short. The Democratic Party convention is in August. We couldn't get this guy to step down earlier. He held out and held on. You know what I'm saying? When he throws in the towel, he doesn't leave many options. Now, the question is, who is Kamala Harris? I'm not talking about the laughing hyena and, party girl, Beyonce, all that. She can, okay, you can do the funky chicken or whatever it goes. You can tweet. You real soulful sister, all that shit. AKA Howard University. You know what I'm saying? When asked one show, she was on what's a show with somebody that died? A morning breakfast.
Morning Breakfast Club.
No, the Breakfast Club. And Charlemagne the God and all that. So he asked her, "Have you ever smoked weed?" And she said, "I'm from Jamaica." And she know what we do now. At that point, her father said, "Yeah, cut her off with the quickness." So why are you gonna stereotype everybody down in Jamaica? I got a PhD in economics. Your grandmother was a parliamentarian, and you gonna come? Yeah, we smoke the weed in Jamaica. What else we do down here? That's all we do. All that bullshit. So, trying to be hip, trying to fit in, all that. But she did all that, and how to reintroduce her. She has failed as a politician on the national level. She was a vice president who literally did nothing, and people see her as not for real.
Yeah.
As a player, as a party girl, as an ambitious person who was made by the Democratic machine in the state of California. Hence, the day after Biden announces that he's not going to run. So people were saying, well, why don't you show your face? Because they had him locked down under the guise that he had COVID. Nobody has seen the test yet. But we do know he was locked down. And they say they locked him down for COVID.
Quarantine?
I'm quarantining so I don't pass COVID on to nobody. You know what I'm saying? So people started speculating, is he dead? Is he still alive? What's going on? So then they have to announce he will speak to the nation on Wednesday. So he gave a speech to, and then they said, that wasn't live. That was a film speech to the nation. He did it, and then the eyes tell it all.
It's AI.
Huh?
It's AI.
It was an AI. But the cat's eyes just, So anyway,
I'm telling you, my no.
at this point, the nation is riveted to this election. This is not a thing, well, after Labor Day and in October, the people will then begin to take things seriously. The nation is locked in. And the people are looking at all of this and drawing their own conclusions. The question is, there are multiple competing factions within the Democratic Party. There's the Obama faction, there's the Hillary and Bill Clinton faction, there's the Bernie Sanders AOC faction, there is the Biden faction. All of these are competing, almost antagonistic factions. The thing that the Democratic Party establishment must do is to unite the party against Trump. And that's a minimum standard. They can't expect anything more than that. And for that, they believe that Kamala Harris is adequate, not inspiring, not in any way bringing any confidence to the system, but she can be a symbol of party unity. This is why, if you remember, they all came out immediately. Schumer, you know, this case, a major plan. The majority leader in the Senate from New York, he gives a press conference. He says, I'm supporting Kamala Harris. And then he said, I'll clap. And everybody said, ain't nobody clapping, you know. And then, of course, Hakeem Jeffries, they all fell in line, except Obama. And why was he holding out? You know, it is speculated that it was the internal struggle between the Obama faction and the Clinton faction. I did not know this before. I had it wrong. Caleb Moffitt, who wrote a book on Kamala, a little small book on Kamala Harris, the book was suddenly taken off Amazon. And so he's on certain shows, and he was saying that Kamala Harris is in the Clinton camp. And I didn't see, I thought she was in the Obama camp. But none of these alliances are permanent or stable. She could be in the Clinton camp now, but in the Obama camp previously. She could have switched horses. But Obama and Michelle Obama wait at least 5 days, which indicated a reluctance and an unhappiness. James Carville, who comes out of the Clinton camp, but is kind of an independent analyst and Democratic Party strategist, said, no, we should not coronate Kamala Harris. We should have many town halls or many primaries to choose and let the delegates choose who the candidate will be. Others have said it should be an open convention. You know what I'm saying? Where all hell would literally break loose, you know? And the money people, and here we have to take seriously the psychology of big capitalists who invest for return, who panic at the first sign that they're going to lose money, they said, in effect, I think, and this drove the top politicians, they said that no, uh, they said, in effect, we must seal the deal now. We can't wait. And once it looked like Kamala was the candidate, the money flowed in. That 90 million or so that they were holding back, boom, it's all the way in. You know, a lot of, then they tried to, this narrative. Well, all of this money came from small donors. Please. It was not. It was the big money, big donors. Because it was $100 million, the amount that they had said they were holding back. So, and it came like that, as they say, with the quickness. It is a coronation thus far. The crisis for them is that, well, while they have coronated her, there are jittery feelings. Now, not a lot of polls are out. And this polling business is, how would you say, it is a business, and all polls are not the same. Some polls are very, what they call A or A plus polls. Others are B minus polls. The A plus polls are the more reliable ones. The A plus polls are the ones that you pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to have done. If you go to Real Clear Politics online, they give an average of all of the polls. But what it looks like right now, that the polling, i.e. Trump versus Harris, is what Trump versus Biden was before the debate debacle. Now, the frightening thing for the state, but when I say this, I'm talking about the ruling class. We can talk more about what is the state, what is the ruling class. I think we have to be a bit more precise about this. But the jittery thing is that however you cut it, Trump is doing much better in 2024 than he was in 2020. Trump never led in major polls in the elections of 2016 or 2020. Hillary led in almost every poll, and then Biden in 2020 led in almost every. Now it's the opposite. Before Biden stepped out, Trump was leading in every poll. Now, I felt that Biden was going to be forced out, not because of the debate. That was a sudden collapse. I did not see that coming. But that is not unusual in social political movements and in history, a sudden collapse. I thought the polls wouldn't get any better for him, that Trump would be winning in all of the the battleground states. And there's 7 of them, some say 3, basically. And that Pennsylvania would be the key, Philadelphia's black vote would be central, and all of that. I didn't see a path for Biden to win Pennsylvania. And then Trump was leading in all of these Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, and by a little bit in Michigan, a little bit in Wisconsin. But Pennsylvania, after everything was calculated in, would be the battleground state. And then it looked like Trump had expanded the electoral map. He was seen as competitive in New Jersey, that if not completely competitive, at least challenging in New York, etc. So it looked like before Biden stepped out as a real disaster for the Democrats. That's why they had to get rid of this guy. It looked like uh, an electoral college landslide and a popular vote victory, which would have been the first time that a Republican won the popular vote, I think, since 2004, and before that, 1984. You know, Republicans, when they win, and their strategy is to win electoral college victories without the popular vote. So Trump is doing fantastically well. It's like it is his election to lose. They had to get rid of the guy. Now, some people have a conspiracy theory that, well, Biden's enemies set him up with this debate. Well, maybe so. But the other side is that this was a Hail Mary, you know what a Hail Mary pass is, you know, the last second of the football game and you're down by 2. And so you throw, you know, a Hail Mary pass 99 yards and just hope the guy catches it. Well, this was almost like a Hail Mary. They couldn't get the polls up after the State of the Union. He was not showing a real competitiveness, at least in the polls. And the big ones, the New York Times, Siena College, and New York Times poll is seen as an A+ poll. Couldn't get them up. And then other polls were showing similar things. You know, I mean, mainline, not like Rasmussen. The Rasmussen poll is seen as a more Republican poll, and therefore a lot of people say it's unreliable, although it has predicted it did predict 2016, and I think it did predict the outcome of 2020. So we're talking about New York, and that upset everything. And the New York Times polls have been showing the same thing from October 2023 on and on. Couldn't get him up. So they're going to try this debate thing, set up perfectly for Biden. Everything in his favor. No audience, so you don't have people in the crowd, you know, especially Trump people. Yay, go ahead, go get that bum, all that talk. And then they had a thing where when the other candidate was speaking, they would mute, you know, your mic. That all was supposed to put Trump in a cage. But he didn't have to be in a cage because all he had to do was chill because Biden could not do anything. He froze, couldn't complete sentences. It was really tragic to see, but it was so frightening to the ruling elite that a panic was set off. They had to get him out. But I don't go with the conspiracy theory that people in his campaign set him up for failure. I think they agreed that we will try this, that we'll pump you up with whatever pharmaceuticals and illegal drugs we use on you to get you, you know, and all you have to do, yes, no, and then the CNN people would throw softball questions at you and let Trump be Trump, as they say, and you give us enough so the mainstream media could spin the thing for the next 6 months of how well you did. You know the scenario. But it failed. A failed calculation. And this is what I want to emphasize. In this strategic chessboard, move, counter move, you know what I'm saying? tactical, strategic move. So it's a mental thing, like warfare. And the people running the campaign are like generals in armies, And the Democrats and the Biden campaign made a huge effort that they could not recover from. The only recoverable would be to get him out of it, to get him out of it. But he fought. He fought. I don't understand yet where all of the resources for this fight came from. Because it was like him against his family and allies. But I guess, even in a demented state, the guy has some pride and has a strong will to fight. And he said, I've been down before and I've come back. I don't take that lightly, by the way. Because a lot of this depends on what's inside you. And therefore, contrary to what the media tries to say, two old men, you had two cats, two bulls, two warriors, two fighters with strong will. And they want to go at each other. Biden wants to defeat Trump and thinks he can defeat Trump. Yeah, I'm wounded. Yeah, I'm weak, but I can defeat this cat. That's, you know what I'm saying? Don't minimize that factor. Don't minimize it. And Trump, with this powerful will, I'm going to take the ruling class down. You're not going to defeat me. You stole it in 2020. Now I'm back. So you get this. Now, this is why what we call the subjective factor. Who is at the top? Can Kamala sustain what is coming? What is inside? You see what I'm saying? If, like Biden said, I lost my wife and daughter in 1972. I've always come from behind. Well, those types of experiences in life make you a certain way, hardens you, toughens you. You know what I'm saying? Kamala is a made woman from the West Coast. Everything she got was because she's a pretty woman, she's nice, and she knows how to maneuver and influence men. She's made. She ain't never fought. Don't know how to fight. The first opportunity she got to fight on the national level was in the Democratic Party primaries of 2020. Her coming out, 20,000 people in San Francisco shout, "We want Kamala, we want Kamala." And then a couple months later, she didn't even get 2% of the vote and had to leave before the first caucus in Iowa. No fight. Now, can they surround her with enough money, enough expertise, enough everything, and of course the whole mainstream media, to protect her from the external forces coming at her, from the forces around her that don't like her, and from herself? Does she panic? You know what I'm saying? We don't know. I would say right now, I don't think she has the toughness. And that's what Biden was saying. To his credit, I don't like him at all. But you have to give credit where credit is due. He said, I'm a fighter. I might be down, but I'm not out. See, that's that thing. And Trump is a cat that say, you're not going to defeat me. I'm going to take this whole thing down. Now, that's them. But the other and decisive factor that masses, the political pundits, the pollsters can talk as long as they want. They can talk as much trash as they can talk. But it is the people who will decide this election and many of them, if not most of them, independent of the political establishment. And this is huge. I'm going to stop it. Take, for example, the Teamsters Union. Speak at the Republican Party convention. As soon as Biden stepped down and said, Kamala, SEIU comes out. How y'all come out so fast? Don't you have to vet her? You know what I'm saying? AFL said, oh, we would. Wait a minute. She ain't got one vote in a primary. Y'all out already? American Federation, we with her. Now, Sean Fain of the UAW, having been burnt by his rush to endorse Biden a few months ago, he's chilling. Well, I need a ceasefire, all that shit. You know what I'm saying? Because your members told you we united on the strike, but your politics, your political choices are yours, not ours. And over half of the UAW is with Trump or undecided. I'll put it that way. They're not going with the leadership. These are indications that the people will decide. Take a city like Philadelphia. The black vote in Philadelphia might decide how Pennsylvania goes. There's a gender split among black people. We've never seen it like this before. Black women, especially the bourgeois and educated, and what they call the divine nine, the sororities, and that's a whole other question. The AKA, the Delta. See, y'all don't know nothing. Steppers and all that shit. We with Kamala, and all that. But most black people ain't in no sorority. They didn't go to college, not even a black college. So they don't feel that like that. But this is the key thing among black people. The class division is greater than it's ever been. The more privileged, the more highly educated, those with more wealth, with more opportunities, those who could send their children to a college, if not an elite college, see the world vastly differently than the majority of black people, for whom America is, as we say, a dark and tragic landscape. Most black Philadelphians see poverty and homelessness, youth without futures, illness, mental illness. They see the worst outcomes of this deindustrialized, globalized war economy. I think it will be very difficult to convince them that Kamala Harris is going to make life better for you. I don't think you can convince them of that. Black men, and this is where the feminist theory don't fit the oppressed. It might work in the white world. But once you get to the colonized and the oppressed racial groups, it don't fit. In other words, black men are not the oppressed black men. White men and women are part of the oppressive group. To transfer that to black men as though the gender contradiction in the white world is only replayed in the black world is a false thing and a fiction. So you might want to point the finger and say, well, the problem of this election is black men supporting Trump and not coming out to vote. And after having heard that for many decades, most black men said, fuck you. You know, you blame us for everything. Unemployment, slavery, anything that went weird to blame, you know? And it became even more, that narrative became even more intense, more vitriolic, more disuniting to black people in the postmodern framing of things. It is an academic discourse. It comes from elites. It does not take into account the life world of the black community, the high rates of imprisonment of young black men. How are you going to blame them for oppressing anybody when 30% of them are locked up to begin with? They're the oppressor. Who are the main targets of police murder and black men? Oh, but they're the oppressor. You know? No. So I was saying to a friend yesterday, black men are immune to it. Don't give a damn. Throw it at us. We don't care. You said everything you could say, so we don't care anymore. And that's the big. They will either not vote, or up to 40% of them, I suspect, will either not vote or vote for Trump. As an outsider, and this is what we have to understand about the Trump phenomenon. Everybody that votes for Trump don't agree with Trump. They agree with his positioning vis-a-vis the ruling elite. I'm voting for Trump because he seems to be the only person standing up to this arrogant, narcissistic, college-educated, bullshit-talking elites. Anger is motivating the working class across the color line and across the gender line. Anger, resentment, and in the black community, the class anger, class resentment, sense of class revenge is deeper than ever before. Is deeper than ever before. And they don't like, I'll speak black men, but black men and women. They don't like these white-made, white authenticated black leaders that they can bring out every 4 years to tell you, vote for me and I'm going to set you free. That's a song about Temptations. Right? So I'll end on this. The crisis of the state, which can be defined as a crisis of whether the ruling class can rule. So the crisis of whether the ruling class can rule. See what I'm saying? Their identities, the Hillarys, Obamas, look at the way they struck. You see what I'm saying? Untouched. It's like the aristocracy before the French Revolution. You know what I'm saying? That's why the French master said to them, oh, you think you're cute? Okay, come on over here, we got the guillotine for you. Let's see how you feel now when you drop this. That's the type. But they think they rule by natural right. That they have a right to rule, and you have a right to bow down to them, or obligation to bow down to them. It is angering the people. And now, the people are engaged more than they have ever been engaged this early in a presidential election. People have never been this engaged. The question is, can the state be saved? As we said, we have to look at the multiple options and possibilities on all sides. One, the question of civil war is not off the table. Whether civil wars can occur on many levels. An angry, disappointed mass of people who feel that the election was taken from them, that it was fought unfairly, that democracy was kicked to the curb in order for an elite to continue to rule. They might withdraw from the system, and once withdrawing from it, will then decide what they do. The second is a pre-revolutionary situation. That is a positive situation. People say, well, the conditions for revolution are not in place. And that's a matter of evaluation and assessment. What conditions do we need? You know what I'm saying? The conditions for the Russian Revolution might not be the conditions for this one. The conditions, the conditionalities, the objective necessities. But we can't, a priori, before the fact, say what those conditions are. And a lot depends on the capacity of the people. Some people say you need a vanguard party. What the fuck that mean? That can mean any number of things. And what makes the vanguard the vanguard? You say you're the vanguard? I'm the vanguard because I said it. We don't know. But one thing is for certain, something close to a pre-revolutionary situation exists in this country at this time. I'm from back in the days, cold-blooded from back in the days. We could never, ever have conceived a situation like this one, where 70% of the people in an A+ poll, New York Times poll, said the system has to either be fundamentally changed or torn down. Never, ever has that happened. That looks like a pre-revolutionary situation. Then there could be, as I mentioned before, Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, the ruin of all classes, the collapse of society, a long dark ages, a long period of ungovernability, clashes and splits and divisions and wars within political parties, within factions and so on. One thing is not on the table. And this is what back in the days a lot of people talked about. You talk about all of the options. One is not on the table: race war. Mm-hmm. This is a qualitatively new moment when all of the indicators are of something looking like a class conflict. You see, you go back to the 1960s and 70s. Even you take settler colonialist theories. They're based in one way upon the assumption of race conflict, of race war. There is no indication of it at this time. Think about it. Every poll, there's no heightened race antagonism. White folk, white working and poor people, when polled, are not saying, we want to take the blacks down. We want to take the right to vote away from black people. We think black people, yada, yada, yada. So what we see, like this last poll I said, talk about a clash with the political and economic Let's ask, how do the elite act in time like this? Because they're not going to throw in the towel, believe me. They're going to fight to the bitter end. Now, I would say if I were to take a measure of their psychological, spiritual well-being, it's not good. They're pessimistic, cynical, and they're wondering about whether they can hold on. You know, polls of the military, polls of the police, and all of this that they would have to rely upon are that the military, the police, and other for instruments of force and violence, the people that make them up have the same attitudes that the majority of the people have. This is a corrupt system. It doesn't represent me. I'm barely making enough to survive. And I want to see them be brought down type of attitude. So can they rely upon the army? Can they rely upon the police? Can they rely upon the National Guard? Well, that's a big question mark, and they might not be able to. But they will try to fight back. They will use the instruments of ideology, of propaganda, of distraction, to give them time. And then when that doesn't work, they will use their tried and tested instruments of assassination, of terror, limiting of dissent, squashing of free speech, the use of the internet and social media, canceling people. You say, oh, the nation is fascist. Oh, you're lying. We're going to cut you. We killed your account because you used the word fascist. Or if you say, F whoever. Oh, we're going to shut you down because you violated our community standards. So they will use that. Every instrument that they think they have. I think they're losing it. I think they're losing within their own country, but then the great victory for humanity, the collapse of the last great. I could say more about how we should, but this is the context that we go forward to celebrating James Baldwin's 100th birthday. I think we should go forward as a celebration on many levels. It's a great celebration. So I'll stop there.
Hearing you talk about even at the beginning and then towards the end when you went back to talking about how this is the most the people have been engaged in an election, probably in a long time.
Never this early.
And well, because when you talked about how the last time a movement took over a party was the Free Soilers, with Abraham Lincoln.
1854.
Yeah, it made me also go back to Black Reconstruction. This thing of that, like, or even because what I'm putting together here is hearing you talk made me think about people being disengaged in elections, despite how much people want to insist that Trump is the enemy of democracy. In fact, because of Trump not bowing down to the discourse or the tradition, the standards, the discourse, the propaganda, or like the rules set by the ruling elite. Ironically, in some ways, it's created like openings for there to be in some ways signs of democracy. People actually feeling engaged. Either they don't have to agree with Trump, but they're engaged. That like it's because of the attempted assassination on Trump, and the way he was so defiant of the discourse of the ruling elite that makes Biden also have to drop out, and the crisis of the Democratic Party. Where even like labor unions, like Sean Fain, realizes like I can't just endorse the Democratic Party anymore. And I don't know, it reminded me of how what we're seeing today is not as simple as it's not as simple as two parties, but basically, even with the Civil War and Reconstruction, Du Bois never described it as like Du Bois always described it as a battle of systems. Like the North and the South, the North didn't really care about slavery. They didn't care about slavery because they cared about Black people. They were concerned with a battle for the state in some ways. Or maybe that's not a good description, but he described it as the North and the South as two systems combating each other in some ways, in an attempt to consolidate the state, or in some way. And then it's really the Black proletariat and their movement for freedom who are making an enormous move to fulfill democracy, which is still not fulfilled today. And I feel like in some ways, it's important to even see the Civil War. It's not really about like who cared about Black people, North or South, but it was a battle of the ruling elite, or rulers of the North, rulers of the South, like basically competing to consolidate a system. Because it helps clarify, I think, today that the question of today is the same, in some ways, unanswered question of that battle for democracy. And the fallout you're seeing is like people almost being re-engaged with a democratic struggle that was shut down after King's assassination, that it's re-emerging. And it's taking like a different form, but I don't know, I feel like to see it as like a re-emerging battle for democracy, or in some ways, where the people, for once, are closer than ever to deciding the outcomes of even something like an election, or like who can stay in the race and who has to like inevitably fall out of the race. Like, because even the way, at least I can speak for the Democratic Party, the way the Democratic Party works is like when you're talking about the competing factions of the Democratic Party, I actually think that's really important to recognize, where there basically are such things as operatives, like behind candidate faces, like behind candidates. And there's a whole ecosystem of strategists and operatives who at this point are inadequate. Maybe for a while, for decades, they were the ones deciding. But you're seeing now more than ever, no matter how many people Kamala tries to surround herself with, in some ways there's a question of, well, will it be enough? Will it ever be enough? Because in some ways the people are at a point where the masses of people are reaching a place where they're not governable, not controllable. The propaganda doesn't work. And no matter how many like basically highly educated operatives you try to like surround yourself to create the background of the government, it will never be enough at this point. And that's kind of unprecedented, I think, maybe since the Civil War. That's what it feels like. And which brings up the question where you said, can the state be saved? And so there are three outcomes. There are three outcomes right now. Civil War, Civil War is not the same as race war, because even the Civil War, like even the actual Civil War wasn't a race war. It was a battle of systems. It was a battle of like competing systems versus which is also still versus the people and democracy. Or you have a pre-revolutionary. There's a pre-revolutionary possibility, which would require the people to take up the democratic struggle in a more consolidated way, which the people right now are not consolidated. And then there's the third option, which is collapse of society itself, which is what Baldwin would say must be avoided. Like the whole the whole attempt of King was to minimize the damage.
Right.
Like Baldwin's whole formulation is because this society in America, like what we call America, has been from the very beginning been founded on, most importantly, the transatlantic slave trade, the existence of the Black proletariat, like a separation of white and Black. So there is such thing as, like, there's not just one working class. There's a Black proletariat and a white proletariat. There's a Black worker and a white worker, as Du Bois would say. Always says, because you create an oppressed people, you will always create the conditions for liberation. Because you will always create the conditions for struggle. Because an oppressed people will always fight for their freedom. Like that's just lots of law. Like that's a law. That's a truth of human history. And the question is, King and the Black freedom struggle, the civil rights movement, was attempting to fulfill freedom while minimizing the damage. And Baldwin's whole thing in No Name in the Street, published in 1972, is he's saying, okay, well, now that you've assassinated the King of Peace, what you don't realize is that you've given permission. You basically set up the conditions for full damage, which is like, so now there's not a guarantee of a revolution with minimal damage. You're basically allowing for there to be all possibilities, but at the end of the day, the bottom line truth is an oppressed people will always fight. But I like the way Baldwin says that thing of, the question is how much damage will be minimized. And that's also why I like the way you clarified, Doc, that we're in an interregnum where the only in some ways law of development history you can say with confidence is that oppressed people will always fight for freedom. There will always be conflict. There will always be a fight for freedom. But in an interregnum where there's a transitional period between like the old world and the new world, like non-freedom and then freedom, which the people always fight for, you don't have a guarantee. The window is the window of damage, I guess. And that's where I see the three paths of, there's civil war, there's free revolution, and then there's collapse of society itself. But yeah, and I guess the last thing I wanted to say is I think Baldwin, I do think that's where Baldwin becomes important. His concept of his understanding of where King or even like Malcolm X and the Black Panther Party, and basically this great movement of Black people fighting for the same things, by different methods, quote unquote methods, fighting for freedom. And then the great counter-revolution of the assassinations, the shutdown of the Third American Revolution, that in some ways Baldwin's framework of this has been a country that has never been free. And so the whole law of America has been the fight to complete freedom. Like this is not a country that's ever been free. The people have never been free, and white people, non-Black people, no one in this country will be free until Black people, until there is no need for there to be what Baldwin would say, the Negro. And so I feel like that becomes clarifying for today.
Yeah, I think I like that you brought up Black Reconstruction, in part because one of the, in some ways, like the ways of thinking that you get from someone like Du Bois, but also someone like Baldwin, is how to think in complexity without losing sight of what you could call the rational kernel of the movement in history. And I think, we talked about Black Reconstruction over and over again over the past couple of years, but part of it that you can extract from it is, the Civil War and Reconstruction also being a period of political and ideological realignment in the sense that, you know, for instance, like people like Eric Foner will say the main lesson of Reconstruction is that white people will always side with the ruling class. Whereas Du Bois' way of framing it is that ultimately the white worker did side with the ruling class, but that was not determined. That actually there was a lot of flux, there's a lot of fluidity in this period of crisis, of turmoil, of civil war, of revolution, counter-revolution, and all that. And actually, for a time, the white worker was moving closer towards the black worker, and that basically it's like this question of like, will white people always side with the ruling class? However, you can also even construe the ruling class, I think, is not the way that Du Bois framed it. But then today that gets weaponized in terms of basically like the more quote unquote radical, and we covered this a few years ago, or like last year, I guess, when we did the Black Reconstruction Conference or Symposium. But it gets weaponized where people say, oh, like Trump is the example of the white working class, again, siding with the ruling class. And I think that that is first an anti-Du Boisian way of framing it, but also it is not just a misunderstanding of history, but also a misunderstanding of the present. And I think the other thing that is very, like, that stands out a lot from Black Reconstruction is that when Du Bois even talks about the end of the Civil War and the attempt to reconstruct the South, he talks about there's like this really famous passage that we've read where it's like he talks about like two stars aligning in like a galaxy for like the span of like a few seconds and the lifespan of like an eternity. And what he's like describing is basically you had simultaneously like a more advanced industrial capitalism represented by northern capital, but also the possibility of what he calls the dictatorship of the black proletariat coalescing and emerging at the same time, and in some ways being represented and almost seen as the same thing. And so even with like the Trump movement, for instance, like you can see it in terms of like there's also because there's also multiple forces converging on the Trump. Even if you just take the phenomena of the Trump movement, like there's multiple forces converging on it. But even if you make it larger, like an election, like is an election, especially in like a bourgeois like political sense, like I think there's a lot of reasonable skepticism about what elections can do. And I think at the same time, it's like there are times when an election, yes, is about just like purely an electoral contest, but it's also about something much larger. There's something like kind of emergent in it. And the task is to basically be able to identify what's actually happening in like the different forces and like you were saying, even like different systems or different um, emergent phenomena. And I feel like that's really important. And then also, I feel like the other thing that I think is really important is after Kamala got announced, and I say this as one of the people in free school who, again, is like, you could say is part of the professional propaganda industry of like marketing. I've never seen a propaganda blitz like the one that they pushed for Kamala. Like the amount of like especially on like social media, it's like the amount of money, but also like the mainstream media, like TikTok, like all of these, like basically all of the kind of avenues of information, especially for educated, like educated, what you can call the educated class in the United States, of like people who have college degrees. Like I don't think I've ever seen so intense of a propaganda blitz. And part of this is like what we've like talked about in terms of part of the ideological struggle or the political struggle is the battle of perception. And this was part of the reason why I think the media turned on Biden is because Biden's like disaster debate performance like revealed to the people in so stark a way like basically that the ruling class is not able to rule because they're like literally senile. And this is part of what was unforgivable about Biden is that he damaged the perception of the legitimacy of the ruling class. And that was why he had to be taken out. And what we've seen, I feel like over the past like week or week and a half is basically like after they push Biden out, it's like even though there are also, these competing factions, I think one is just like the political ground game of like mobilizing voters, mobilizing volunteers, like door knocking, all that stuff. But a lot of it is about basically like, can you recapture the perception, especially of what you consider like the Democratic voting base? And I think this is, I guess, in terms of like even the possibility of civil war, I think it would be important to investigate what would be the fault lines of that. Where I agree it wouldn't be a race war, and maybe you could say it would be a class war. But part of it also is consistently what has become one of the biggest dividing lines in American society today is like this question of education, where the ironic thing is that the more educated parts of American society look down on the less educated parts of American society and say, oh, they're the most susceptible to fascism and the most susceptible to like propaganda, like a strongman figure like Trump. And like obviously, like it's not like probably I don't know, like kind of narrative management, like narrative control, propaganda, PR, all of that suffuses America. But the ironic thing is actually, from what I've seen, and also kind of within, you could say, within the class that some of us maybe emerge from, it's like actually, it's like the people that I know are in some ways the most susceptible to propaganda in ways because they've been ideologically molded and fashioned by certain institutions, which are also the closest to the ruling class. And I feel like that's also important, but I just feel like part of what has, even at the same time, I think part of what has disturbed me in some ways is I do think that whether it's amongst certain sections of like young educated people, like young professionals, or even like older people, like basically like boomers and millennials and all that stuff, I think in the midst of what has been basically the propaganda war, the perception war, I think there are, at least from the people that I know, there are a lot of people who basically crave what you could say is like almost the appearance of like, I don't know if stability is the right word, but it's like in Kamala they see something which is like almost a return to like what they see as like normal democratic politics or like normal like governance, like all that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of people crave that, and they crave a sense of safety almost within, and Kamala in some ways, and also the way that they're like all of this money is being like funneled to push her, like kind of elevate her and present her in a way. I think in some ways meets almost psychologically people's like almost psychological need to have like a figure like Kamala there. And I don't know. I think that this is. I also agree that this is part of what I think is important about Baldwin in the sense that, like, I think part of what Baldwin opens the door to is giving Americans the ability to see and to see reality. And I think this is especially relevant in this time when, on the one hand, you have growing numbers of people who don't trust the ruling elite, the ruling institutions, the institutions of the media, like the ruling class, the government, all that stuff. And the question is like, can they really like, can they see each other? Can they see, like basically, like reality, or what Baldwin calls reality? And I think this is part of the, in some ways, the task that we undertake. And I think this is what we have to carry forward in a way where it's not even just about like, oh, like, like I don't think for once, like, I don't know what Baldwin would have said about Trump. Like, I honestly, but I feel like it's less about that and more about like actually peeling apart all of these layers of like propaganda, narrative, and everything about, and actually trying to get to the heart of what's happening in American society, and especially for like the people to see each other in a clear way. And I think part of this is like Baldwin's argument is that white people have to become black. And he's not saying like literally become black, but like they have to learn to see the world in the way that black people see the world. And this is in some ways part of the like the contractions, the crisis, in some ways, it's like almost it's like a tortured move towards that. Um, but yeah, and I guess the last thing is I feel like the other big thing that happened in the past week was Netanyahu's visit to DC, and yeah, honestly, I feel like personally, like I'm disgusted by both Trump and Biden and Kamala, and all of them for basically embracing Netanyahu, and uh, and I feel like Trump deserves every bit of criticism and almost condemnation for that because I think it is true that even if October 7th didn't happen while Trump was in office, what he did with Israel prior to that laid the groundwork for it because in part, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, like doing the Abraham Accord, which is basically trying to forge like quote unquote peace in the Middle East while kind of stepping over the Palestine question and basically trying to also forge like some kind of rapprochement between Israel and like other Arab states and all that. But I think I was listening to the Duran guys on the way over here, and part of how they talk about it is that in some ways Netanyahu would prefer Trump to be president, but their assessment is that actually Netanyahu is making a strategic miscalculation because even while Trump will be like, oh, like I'm best friends with Netanyahu, like we get along great, like that stuff. Like what they were saying is that um, in the actual substance of it, whether regardless of how Trump himself even feels, Trump at this point has become like inextricably tied to the movement which has pushed him onto the stage of history, basically. And regardless even of how, like, let's say people in the MAGA movement view like the Palestine protesters, the overwhelming mandate that MAGA places on Trump is basically no more wars, like no more foreign wars, get out of the wars, like stop spending all this money on the wars. And so they were saying that basically actually Netanyahu is making a gamble in terms of wanting to align himself with Trump, which is also why during his speech at Congress, like first of all, it was like mostly Republican, or it was like more Republicans who were there, but also he made this like proposal for like an Abraham alliance, which would basically be like a Middle Eastern NATO. But he used the Abraham alliance, referencing Trump's Abraham Accords. Um, but they were saying that basically, yeah, Netanyahu would actually have he has much more leeway in some ways with Biden, and it's questionable in terms of Kamala because I think Kamala also is like trying to like provide the appearance of appealing to like the more like the dissatisfied parts of like the Democratic base who are very pro-Palestine or just anti-genocide, and trying to like kind of reel them back in. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's the other part of the equation where like in this period of crisis, it's both a domestic crisis but also a crisis of empire, in which actually like part of what we're seeing today is that the question of empire can no longer be dismissed as a question external. It becomes an internal question that like becomes part of the like domestic political like battle basically, and the domestic political struggle, in which the people themselves see the question of empire not just in terms of like how much it costs, like all this money that's being sent overseas when it could be being spent at home, but also I think this is something that is increasingly become part of across whether it's like even whether you identify as Republican, Independent, or Democrat. It's like I think growing numbers of Americans feel that essentially the American state does not see its primary function as delivering a social contract to the American people. And the American state sees its primary function as basically beholden to maintaining a global empire. And so, in that sense, this question of imperialism reflects back to the people, in some ways, both the farce of American democracy and what's called American democracy, but in some ways, it reflects back to the people, like, you could call it their unfreedom, but also like in a more sharp way, I guess, like almost like their own impotence. And so the question is like for the people to actually realize, like actually do they have the capacity to actually move towards like a broader vision of freedom, which has to also is kind of tied up with this like basically the collapse of not just the American state, but essentially the American empire. and assert like a new vision for democracy in the midst of that crisis.
Yeah, I want to add to this because even what you said, Doc, and I would agree with that. That if Trump had died, if the assassin's bullet took him out on what day, 13th of July, whatever, then there would be no need for Biden to step down. Um, I don't know. I mean, it's just easy for me to believe that they could have gotten away with somebody that incompetent, somebody that not capable of being in control of what he says or even saying, finishing sentences. But doesn't that, I mean, going to what Jeremiah was saying, doesn't that sort of expose that the Democratic Party candidate, whoever it is, I mean, they're not really running a presidential race. The only goal, it's not about policies. I know a lot of people like to say, oh, but you should vote on the basis of what policies you would like to see, come out of the new regime or whatever. But none of this is about policies. I mean, it's really the perpetuation of the security of the state and its global agenda. So it doesn't even matter who is put up as the Democratic candidate. And if Trump had died, it could be Biden, and everybody would know he's not up to the task. But, well, he's not supposed to do anything. Like, his task is to be the face of, this superstructure that exists, whose continuity has to be. Um, but then the other thing I was thinking.
Okay, and this is what makes this such a unique election.
Yes.
Because the whole question of the state, as you put it, is critical,
Yeah.
even if it's a subtext of the whole thing.
Right.
I do. Sorry.
And I would even go as far as to say that Trump seems like the only presidential candidate in some ways who can, in terms of something actually changing, or America's role in the world being any different. But then I also wanted to talk about what you had said, that this is a qualitatively different moment because there's no race war on the table. Now, I thought that was very interesting, and I've not like I haven't heard it put like that, but it clarifies a lot of things where overtly, I think the Trump movement, since the beginning, since 2016, there has been an attempt to sort of mark it, label it as, a racist, white supremacist group.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because if I might
Please go ahead.
part of the underlying assumption of the counter-revolution of 1776, 1619 project and settler colonialism is that the only forward movement is through race war.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Trump represents as the epitome of racism, the center. He wants to unleash white people to carry out a race war against black people. But there is no empirical evidence of anything coming close to that.
Right.
If you don't mind, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, I think, and sort of goes back to a conversation we had in Free Scale a while back, which was also that there needs to be a new formulation, a new theoretical formulation of what race even means, or how it sort of plays out in social relationships or ideological relationships with people, where it's becoming more and more clear that it's not the Trump supporters who are white supremacists, but it's actually the ruling class. And they're not even, it doesn't even have to be a white person, in order to be part of that coalition. And more Baldwin becomes important, where you have to see white supremacy, not just about the color of your skin, but about this power structure, about, a philosophy based in subjugation, domination, and so on. But yeah.
Yeah, that's, um, I think in line with what Purva is saying too, which is that, or back to what Emily was referring to with Black Reconstruction, the contradiction in Black Reconstruction is that even among poor white people, they did not see their interests as aligned to the Black proletariat. And therefore there's a split. And there was that wage of whiteness, and there was okay, at least I'm not the slave. and therefore not seeing the uplift or the freedom of slavery or the abolishment of slavery as in their interests. But it is true, which is that there have been changes in American history, specifically Reconstruction and also the Black freedom struggle, where Americans are, as Free School has formulated it, is less racist today than it was then. And that's what was interesting during the RNC as well, where I had watched a segment of this Black teacher in the public school system. And she had given this speech of how the school system has collapsed and has fallen under the 4 years of Obama and then also Biden. And, you know, I mean, there's limitations to the Trump movement and so forth, but the crux of her argument is that our school systems are failing. You know, our schools have become instead prisons. And what, as she was speaking, you could see the audience, and it was actually, I forget if it was like mostly white, mostly Black, whatever it was, but you could see these white people listening to her, and they were like agreeing, which is that the difference between now and Reconstruction is that there is this sense of coming to reality. Like, what is the reality of America? That's apart from what the ruling elite is telling you. That inflation is lower, that our country is improving, like all these things that they're trying to essentially tell the American people of what they are going through in their lives. But instead, essentially what we're seeing is that whether you're Black, white, whatever, people are seeing that our society, like seeing the actual conditions of our society, and those conditions are actually bringing them together. Because it's not just white and Black. I've been getting feeds on my YouTube of, I think out of it's Chinese, but it's Asians who are also turning to Trump. And this includes my parents. And as you were speaking, yeah, both of them are turning to Trump. And as Doc was speaking, I actually laughed because I realized something. Because my parents, you know, for those who know me personally, they don't agree on a lot of things. But what's been surprising is that these past couple months, you know, independently, they're agreeing on things, which is that they will not vote for Biden and instead they're voting for Trump. And that has been interesting because I realized growing up, you know, it was sort of a apolitical household. Like we didn't really talk about like elections specifically or politics. And if anything, they were more democratic because of the whole image of the Democratic Party being the party of immigrants. But instead, lately, they've been the ones, you know, talking to me to say, like, I definitely would vote for Biden. And
They say why?
well, for my mom, it's the she was saying like the economic conditions of how things, the cost of living has increased. She works in a public school in the cafeteria, and she was also saying like her coworkers were teachers, also cooks in the kitchen. Everyone, there's this dissatisfaction with how the city is being run, and then also by extension the country. For my father, you know, he's a business owner, and so he's also in the heart of New York City, and so a lot of it has to do with crime and immigration. Well, okay, that's a separate story, but and so for it's not exactly to Purva's point, which is that people want to position Trump and the MAGA movement as racist or white, and that might have some origins in where it begun, but that's definitely not what we're seeing today. And what's also interesting is that I was talking to Don DeBar lately because of the Baldwin event, and then he sent me this website called, I think it was the China Academy. And essentially they like release articles by these think tanks in China, of the academic research institutions, political pundits. And recently they had this article on J.D. Vance. And it was interesting because essentially, you know, in Free School, we've been asking this question of, you know, how does the world think of America and the recent political events, specifically the splits in the Democratic versus Republican, within the Democratic Party, within the Republican Party. And this article is really interesting because it had criticized actually an assessment Paul Krugman had made of J.D. Vance, where Krugman basically says that J.D. Vance is a contradiction. How is it that this man that was a never Trumper is now vice president and gives praises to Trump? And this article criticizing Krugman, criticizing Vance, and the point that they make essentially is that Krugman doesn't see the complexity of the situation, the complexity of how things are shifting. And even someone like Vance represents that shift in American society. This man who, is he the hillbilly elegy man, or is he the man of Yale and the elite? Because essentially in that, there's a difference where I think some people critique Vance in that in hillbilly elegy, there's this sense of, oh, there's a way out for these poor whites of Appalachia, the way that Vance had come out of but then now as part of his Vance as a politician, his thing is more institutional, or specifically it's China's fault, or whatever, the deindustrialization of America. But anyways, this article is interesting because it attacks Krugman as essentially the simple-mindedness of the educated ruling elite. And there's this quote that was actually really interesting. I forget who the writers of this article, but they say about Krugman they describe Krugman as a man whose reading comprehension is compromised by party affiliation. And that was really, and so, anyways, as to my point is that it's interesting because you see these shifts happening in American society and even among the people. And what stands out is in these shifts, how do you actually see beyond the surface? Because definitely, like as Jeremiah was saying, this blitz, like I saw everyone's trying to convince you that Cromwell was the person. At least in terms of mainstream media, New York Times, Financial Times, and so forth. But what is it that he represents? And are there similarities actually to her as a representation of a continuum of the Biden policies and the policies of the
Yeah, I think since 2016, the Democrats and Kamala Biden all are just empty vessels for the political donor class and for those wishing to maintain their class position. I think like when I've talked, like when Biden came to Philly and we talked to a bunch of people there, nobody could quote a single thing that Kamala Harris has ever said. No one, you were saying that she's literally done nothing as VP. So I think, yeah, the entire Democratic Party is just an empty vessel. And on the contrary, you have the Trump side, which for a lot of his base represents like a new beginning or like a reset for America. A reset for discontent. So.
I actually wanted to add to the conversation by saying that there has been.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Yeah. There has been a certain amount of online discourse about Kamala being first woman black president, the first Indian president, and there has been an attempt to introduce some aspects of a race and a gender war, but I don't think that people are buying it because when you look at people's comments or their posts or whatever they're sharing, it's mostly, no, it doesn't matter, you're still supporting a genocide. And then, the question of Gaza becomes central in their mind, the question of their own misery because of the continued support of Israel becomes a central question in their minds. And so, yeah, I do agree. I think that there's an attempt to force the race war aspect of the character into this election, but I don't think it's succeeding. Um, I think that after Kamala got endorsed by Biden and she said that she's going to run for president, there were two things that happened. One, like you said, he raised like $100 million from Sunday to Monday, like within 24 hours, he raised that much money. And the second thing is that there was a lot of talk about whether she would be allowed to use the $96 million that Biden had raised. Um, so I was reading into this and I went into a sort of article rabbit hole, and I found out that there were these investigative journalists after 2020 who conducted this investigation into Act Blue, which is the platform of the Democratic Party, which gets all the donations and manages financial responsibilities for the party. Now, what these investigative journalists found between the years of 2020 and 2023 is that all of the donations that Act Blue gets, they have to report to the FEC. And I think that I found it interesting. So I went to the FEC website, and the reason why I went to the FEC website is because this recent, Kamala Harris was supposed to have raised $100 million in small dollar donations with 62% unique or first time donors. Now, if you go to the FEC website, I think that you'll find the list of all the donations on there. And I think that what these investigative journalists found is that a lot of these donations were by the same person. And over again, like $5.63, $4.77, and like hundreds of them by the same person. And they actually tracked these people down. And they went and asked them that, hey, have you ever voted for Act Blue? And they said yes. And then they asked, have you voted for them 217 times? And they said, no, once maybe. So there is evidence that the Democratic Party platform, which handles donations, is committing a certain kind of fraud where they have to almost steal identities of their voter base.
That's conspiracy theory. Because I worked there.
Where? An act.
Yeah, that's conspiracy theory.
What did you say?
I worked for Act.
Oh, shit.
You worked for Act Blue.
Yeah, 2 years.
Really?
Previously.
And in a previous, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I want to.
Oh no, those because I know those investigative journalists. My job was to debunk them. No, it's conspiracy. A lot of people who donate multiple times, it's because they have dementia, so they don't remember. It's a problem. Like a lot of people who vote too many, who donate a lot, it's because they accidentally sign up for recurring donation, and it's a problem because they have a lot of times they're old people who have dementia, and so they don't remember that they signed up, and so like they lose like tons of money. But the more effed up thing about FEC reports is that you don't actually have to report. Actually, you don't have to report to the FEC if it's less than a certain amount of money. But once you it's opposite. Once you are donating over, like I think every election cycle, you can only donate a certain threshold of money, and then after that, you can. But if you're a PAC, you can do unlimited. You can do unlimited donation.
But I think he's seeing something different, and I think the journalism, the reports that just came out suggest fraud, not to mention. Because, okay, how many, let's say there are 10,000 people that did this multiple. So at some point, I think you question whether or not a fraud has been perpetrated on somebody took their name and their credit card. But
No, I had a feeling that with all the reading that I did that there might be some suspicion. Of course, there are a certain number of people who are old and have dementia, not 60% of first-time donors, or I mean, it is 62% of first-time donors, and I don't believe it because, like Doc said, there was a certain amount of donations that were withheld from Biden, and all of that came pouring in right afterwards. And it can't be like all of them can't be like small dollar donations. I'm pretty sure that there were big people involved.
big donors that masquerade themselves behind these multiple donations. That's, I don't know. You don't think it's
Well, unique also, I mean, just the term not unique doesn't mean first. Unique means like individual.
I think it's like a nation.
It's just the nation pop.
Yeah.
It's like GoFundMe. Yeah, it's not.
But I think there is, maybe it's hard to say whether or not there's evidence. I think that people do stop donations in underneath the donation limit, so it doesn't show up as a big donor. And I think similarly, like I think that a lot of accounts on TikTok or Reddit or Twitter, now known as X, are fake accounts, and it just it's a layer of distrust. You can't really trust social media. You can't really trust platforms. It's like a black box. It goes in and you don't really know where it came from. And I guess that's what I'm trying to say about Twitter. But there's sort of signs that something is a robot, something is a script, something. When I worked for the AFL-CIO, you can't ever take those survey results where our reporting is accurate because people would put in fake, people so they could meet their quota, so they could make their job. And there's just so much deception. It's hard to say what numbers are real. So I don't have a conclusion as to whether or not the donations are fake or not. I think that it does happen.
No, go ahead, man. One thing to think about acting and all this stuff. The difference between acting and this group is you catch one another. I think I really want to be serious on this for how I know. One, it seems to me that if we are indeed looking at the failure of the state, so to speak, and all of the ramifications and implications of that it leaves people kind of like regular, everyday people in an incredible state of, for lack of a better word, anxiety, trying to figure out what the heck is going on here, not just out there, but in here. And there's something about the struggle of figuring out if there's going to be something that makes sense coming out of the chaos. There's something about love that it seems to me has got to be at work. You just no ifs, ands, or blanket buts about. And there's something about love, at least it seems to me, that demands that we be able to see each other. You know what I mean? I mean, every once in a while I get the feeling I need to go someplace and see somebody that smiles at me for real, as opposed to that realm of cyberspace that, you know, you don't know what the heck is going on. And I think if there's any possibility of avoiding the kind of chaos and collapse of civilization in the presence of the demise of an empire, it's got to be rooted in something about some kind of love. And that's why I give all a lot of credit. As it related. I'm not sure that love guarantees that everything's gonna end up hunky dory. You know what I mean? I do not, I'm just not sure that I believe that. But at least if there's something about love, no matter how it ends, if you follow, we got that we can lean on, and that helps support us. But another thing, love helps you to listen to each other. You know, I mean, it helps you to hear Trump supporters. You gain some insight on what's going on with them. It helps you to hear, I think, the folks that have been caught in this mess and haven't been caught in it for a long time have just said, I'm throwing in the towel. And it helps you to have a heart for those folks. I think there are a lot of them in all, you know, Texas. I think you guys got that face-to-face stuff figured out about it. I mean, I really do. It's important to me. Now I got that idea. So. Well, go ahead, Greg.
I think definitely what you said really resonated with me in terms of that anxiety and uncertainty. And what you were saying about like talking to your parents. You know, I know that I definitely did not grow up in a political household. I grew up in a household that was very mainstream Democrat, always up in Chicago. And, you know, I started to get calls from my mom about how panicked she is over Biden stepping down. She started to call me and say, well, what are the people in your circles, what are the people at your job saying about Kamala Harris? And if anybody knows me, that's hysterical. I'm subject to the hatch. It's a federal crime for me to discuss Kamala Harris's work. But you know, all sorts of conversations like that. What are people saying? What are people saying? What are people saying? And I noticed, at least in my family of, you know, very mainstream Democrats, that there's starting to be a sort of collapse around, oh, we can just trust whatever's in the New York Times, right? Or we can just trust whatever the talking heads in NBC say, what Rachel Maddow says is gospel. Right. And I think especially like the older the people are in my own family and network that I talk to, the more unsettling that has been for them. And I wish I knew how to help them, you know, and how to try and focus that in a direction that isn't hand-wringing. But it's something that I've definitely been noticing a lot, and especially the one that always mystifies me, and maybe y'all can enlighten me, are the number of people our age that I see saying like, oh, you know, New York, everything like that is a propaganda machine, but where are they getting their news? Right? That's still, there's not a better option that they see, or, you know, they complain about how everything's just trying to sort of push a narrative instead of meaningfully interpret what's going on around us and consider where people are actually at and what the real possibilities are, we know that our news sources aren't adequately acknowledging that, and we're still not growing. And I still don't see a whole lot of people, like, I look forward to this every, I'm new here. I look forward to this every week just so I can have a real conversation with people about, and the people who are in my own community, right? About what is going on around us and in the world. And it mystifies me that more groups like this are not active and out there. I've lived in something like 10 states. This is the first group like this that I've found. Where is everybody at? Right? They're probably, in living rooms, and they're just not as organized or publicized as free school is, but I don't know.
Yeah.
You can see that I'm losing the thread here, but if somebody else can pick this up, I think there is a real value to that, like, face to face in your community. Like, let's shut about the New York Times for a minute and let's talk about what life is looking like for us.
Yeah, well, I was actually thinking of talking about what Reverend Ike brought up and also what Tuba was mentioning before.
I cannot hear you over the air conditioner. I'm too far away. Sorry.
Okay, so I was thinking of responding to what Reverend Ike was saying and connecting to what Purva was mentioning right before regarding the question of the changing nature of white supremacy. But I think the thing you're asking, this idea of what, like, yes, you can talk about, like, we can question the mainstream narratives all we want, but what we really need is a coherent way of thinking that takes us forward. And a lot of this really takes me back to what we were talking about a couple of months back with the conference on science and knowledge, where I think we sort of came to the conclusion about how white supremacy, like, to understand the changing nature of white supremacy, you really need to see it as an attack on civilization itself. And I was thinking that this is something we have talked about for a while, but it's been hitting me recently because only recently have I really started looking at some of Trump's speeches, which is not something I would really listen to a lot back, like a few years back perhaps. But when you do listen to his speeches and the way, like, not just the usual talking points, but really how he interacts with the audience, something that becomes clear is that the value system or the cultural patterns that they talk, that they reflect on are very different from what from what say a New York Times or essentially the liberal culture is going to advocate. It's also different from the kind of culture that we have grown up in many ways, especially in this country. If you are part of the professional class, so to speak. And I think increasingly this this thing that you mentioned, that yes, one thing we do know is not on the table is race war, but at the same time the liberal agenda is to still paint the Trump movement as a racist movement, is because they do see race as a cultural issue alone. And therefore it's always bundled up with such things as family values and so on and so forth, which is, I think, to a large extent a cornerstone of a big part of the Trump movement, and which the ruling elite has always acting on from its changing the assumptions of white supremacy, which has worked for 300 years as essentially a way that you cannot look at a different civilization except through the eyes of white supremacy. So you have to look at it the moment you come into contact with a different civilization, you have to see it as inferior to you. And it seems that now we've come back full circle to a point where it's essentially the white working class who represents this, who represents certain civilizational values. I mean, it's not fully worked out. I don't know if it's very coherent, but they do represent certain civilizational values which are being attacked by the ruling elite. And this attack, it's very similar to how the civilizing mission of white supremacy has looked at every other civilization, in the last 300 years. It seems that it's coming back to that point where it's trying to look at the white working class, and especially the Trump movement and so on. They're trying to paint it like every attack ultimately gets down to the point where you want to think of race as a cultural phenomena, and therefore you want to look at the way these people talk or so on, or you want to look at gender also as a cultural phenomena, and you look at it as, the whole, the same, the question of abortion and so on, which is now going to be the major thing with Trump, like within the JD Vance and Kamala, but this becomes the main issue that the New York Times and so on are going to talk about. So, it seems that, really to see, to understand the changing nature of white supremacy, I think, what Reverend Ike was mentioning, this question of no, but this that's the thing. There is something that Baldwin does offer us, which is why we can talk about love as a state of consciousness, which allows you to look at a different civilization as something to learn from, and yeah, so this is I think it's a very different framework. And I was also thinking of this when this other thing you were saying, Doc, in your introductions, where the idea that the contradictions of the white world are the universal contradictions. I mean, this is the basis of white supremacy. And what Baldwin does offer is, by rejecting these standards, what you do see is it's actually the black condition which may be universal, which there may be something universal in the black condition, which can unite, which really can unite the darker races, so to speak. So it is a new moment, and I think to come back to where I was trying to start from, this idea of a new narrative, it it's not something that's manufactured by, it's not something that can be manufactured by either the New York Times or an opposite equivalent of New York Times, so to speak, because it does come from the history of this country. It's not, it's not something, it's not coming from Europe or Africa either. I just want to.
But isn't this, yeah, just isn't this very interesting, apropos Jeremiah's point of narrative, hegemony, narrative control, and such and so forth. And we cannot take lightly the symbology of Kamala Harris, allegedly in her being the anti-white supremacist against the white supremacist. But but the white supremacist does not call for race war. He calls for a new interracial, intergenerational, intergender, movement. He's not called for race war. But Kamala Harris is supposed to protect us from race war that the white supremacists, alleged white supremacists, have not called for. If it were white supremacist movement, why wouldn't it call for race war? But the other thing is, just a small part of this, is that it is the identity politicians, the identity politics movement, who wish to and have, to a certain extent, reinscribed the color line as a political strategy. It is they who wish to make the case that white people, white workers and white poor people in particular, are the racists, and we have to mobilize a united front against them. But they did not, the quote white supremacists have not argued for united front against black people. If you see what I'm saying. Oh, go ahead.
I was reading a couple of articles recently. I can't pull them up to cite them exactly. About how that shows up in schools. Because schools are a real, public schools especially, are a real hotspot for discerning where people's politics actually lie, because it's one thing to say what kind of life I want for myself, and it's a whole different thing to say what kind of life I want for my children and the children in my community. You know, it was talking about schools in New York City, and I'm not the expert on New York City school system. It's more complicated than Chicago's, which is saying something. But talking about, I don't know, something about it really struck me. It was a man talking about his family's experience not being able to afford private school in New York City and finding a public school that really aligned with their values in terms of unity and building connections, and it was really close to the racial makeup of the whole city, and it looked a lot like their community, and then finding policies that were getting pushed. I think it had a lot to do with standardized testing, which really sort of, you know, were intended to lift people up and really made the school, send the message to the school community, like, your neighbors are not your friends, the other parents and kids in this school aren't your friends, right? Nobody has your best interest at heart but you, right? And we can't work across difference. We have to sort of always be mindful
Hey,
of it.
Grace, and that is what I'm trying to, that re-inscription of the color line, just in the way that you described it, that you say that if you're black and you were, you know, the descendants of slaves, then everyone who wasn't a slave today is one or another way benefiting from your enslavement. I'm sorry.
Right. One of the things that the author sort of expressed some discomfort with was the ostensibly progressive messaging that the color of your skin is the most important thing about you and how you should think. Right? Which is just not, you know, it's important. Absolutely. We can't deny that. It's got a huge influence on how people came to be where they're at. You know, but we see that class dynamic, like you were saying, much more. And it was interesting to me to see that, like, school policies are a huge hotbed of seeing where people's values and morals and ethics are actually at when it comes down to their child.
I'll just say one small thing, and this is that difficulty sociologically of understanding race and color. Very important. In some ways, it's not the most important thing about you, but then in other ways, it is the most important. You understand?
And where is that?
Yeah, well,
Right.
you know, the thing, I would say it like this, it is not, under certain circumstances, the most important thing, but in the societal structuring of race and class and other uh, variables of difference, it plays such a huge part. And even when we talk about the class conflict is so shaped by racial identity, racial mythology, racial many things. So it is that complex thing. At one time, bourgeois liberals used to say that race is declining in significance. Well, maybe yes, maybe no. And I think each situation has to be studied. I guess what I'm saying, it's very hard to say anything absolutely about race in every situation. But I'll just stop.
No, yeah, I definitely hear that. And it's a weird balance to strike, and it's weird to look at party messaging around, you know, where people or where the Democratic and Republican parties choose to put their narrative around that, you know.
Yeah.
And I had somewhere that I was going with that, and I've lost my train of thought. but you're right. It is one of the, if not the most sociologically influential variable, and yet we still don't have a race war on the table.
Absolutely.
Right? That's, I guess, a frustration of mine with, once again, the New York Times, with the sort of political messaging that we hear, especially from that very educated side of things, is, the failure to recognize the actual individual situational lived experiences. The very kind of broad strokes narrative, right? So, I don't know. I was going somewhere with that. I lost.
I mean, I think it's,
Go for it.
I guess I was going to jump in here because I think that's what's so significant about King and the Black freedom struggle, or even like Gandhi and Tagore, where their premise essentially is that it's not that people are the enemy, but rather the ideas of a white supremacist system. And that's because with that assumption is the means of revolution, which is that are you trying to incite a race war, or actually are you trying to incite, or not incite, but to create a transformation of people and the ideas that they hold? Because it is very complex in the sense that, or complex of race and class, because, yeah, why is it that the poorest people in this country, or the population of the poorest people of this country, are mostly Black, the most incarcerated, all these different factors. But at the same time, with the experience of the free school at somewhere like South Philadelphia High School, where it is a pretty mixed school population, and our students are saying, and these are Black young men who are saying that it's not the color of our skin that defines who you are, but rather, like, are you a good person or not? And there are, I think, Brandon could probably speak more to this. Brandon's the teacher at South Philly High School, where he says there are race wars, but it's not between Black and white, but I think it's between Black and Mexican. I don't know what's going on there, but essentially, but yeah, this is among like South Philadelphia High School. It's like a very complex school. It's poor children, we're the children of poor parents, poor society, communities. It's Black, it's Hispanic, it's Southeast Asian or Asian, it's white, and the aspirations are to see each other for who they are, and not their race. But at the same time, the societal pressures are different. And I forget where I was going with this too. Anyways, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, but I think just building on what Alice was saying and also responding to Grace.
Speak up, Chair.
I feel like part of what is also operative in American society right now is almost what you could say is like the antisocial force, which, to make it concrete, is like what Grace was describing of, yeah, like there's all these people in America and scattered across the country, whether in like big cities and suburbs and small towns, and concretely, they have no way of actually talking to each other. And or it's like the places that are offered for people to actually come together and talk, and not just talk, but to actually know one another, and to actually achieve some kind of genuine relationship with one another, are very few and far between. And I think this has in part to do with, like, the decline of the church, the decline of like most public institutions, like institutions for the people over the past couple decades. And yeah, I think part of like what is interesting about this time is that there's like a certain kind of growing disaffected group in America, which, yeah, like you said, does not trust the media, for instance, but the solution to that is not just like, oh, we're going to make our own media ecosystem. As important as it is, like I do think that like having like, quote unquote alternative media is important and is helpful. But I think the real need, and this is what also I think Reverend I was saying, is not just for people to like talk with each other and just like express what they're feeling, but for people to actually enter into like some kind of dialogue, which is a relationship with love. And I say that in part because also like when we talk about the capacity of people, what we're essentially describing is the democratic capacity of the United people. And that capacity is not something which appears overnight, but is something which has to actually be developed and exercised and strengthened. And I think part of what we try to do in the free school is to draw the people into a dialogue which deepens the democratic capacity of people, whether it's through like the Baldwin reading groups or through the events and all that stuff. And I think it's important that we frame it not in this kind of like blasé liberal way of like, oh, like this is just a place where people can talk about what's going on and talk about their feelings. That's, like, you know, as important as it is, but like actually, like Alice was saying, we meet. Part of what I think even like makes free school distinct is that yes, we have like a very like free and very open dialogue, but we always meet under like on certain grounds. Like we're meeting on the ground of like we're trying to build on what was achieved in like the Black Freedom Movement, for instance. So we're trying to like when we say like, achieve our country, like that kind of stuff. And I think it's important that like the framing of that is there. It's like under what auspices do the people need? And this is in part kind of how I understand like even what we're doing with like the year Baldwin, where it's like it makes a difference whether people just meet and talk with each other versus whether you meet and talk with each other and get to know one another like on the ground of like someone like Baldwin. I feel like that makes a very important difference. And part of the reason why I say that is because you know, even if you take this question of like white supremacy and democracy, on one side, like the kind of very immediate understanding of why white supremacy and democracy cannot coexist is because obviously it disenfranchises like a large portion of the population, and so that has made the kind of appearance of American democracy like has basically undercut that image. But the other side of it, which someone like Baldwin points out, is that also whiteness, or how Baldwin conceptualizes whiteness and white supremacy, is that whiteness also almost suffocates the democratic capacity of white people because it creates a consciousness in which you are almost reliant. You're reliant on basically whether you could say a ruling elite or a social system, what that social system or what that ruling elite is telling you about your fellow human being, rather than actually, as Baldwin would say, actually like trusting life, rather than actually being like, oh no, like, and this is part of like the paradox, which is that white people knew that Black people were human all along, but they had to basically force themselves to believe otherwise. And that when you create a society in which there are enough people who kind of operate with that like huge contradiction, it means that that society cannot operate as a democracy because those people are not actually like exercising democracy. They're actually living basically according to like a false narrative.
Holder, you are a victim of the rules you live by.
Yeah. Well,
Maybe
Can I just
should we go to planning?
planning?
For the,
Oh, yeah, can I just?
I mean, I don't mean to.
No, this is related to because
Because
but I actually think even when we were talking about the deepening political crisis today, I actually think, I think it's because Doc and I have been working so much on writing the documentary script. This like new documentary we're making actually is basically, it's not really even about the script, but I feel like what we've been doing is like basically theoretical work.
basically what?
Theoretical work.
Okay.
Yeah, where it was, I think actually it was the first time I had to take seriously Baldwin's theory, actually, like for real theory. And the reason why I think Baldwin is the most helpful person today is because of his language. There's something really important about the newness of his language because, for example, he never says freedom. He says black freedom. What he means by black freedom, he's like King, Malcolm X, the black. What they're struggling for is black freedom. Black freedom doesn't just mean like freedom for black people. What he means is that there is the existence in America. There's no such thing as freedom. There's black freedom, and then quote unquote freedom, which is white freedom. Let's call it white freedom. So, for example, in India, you can have an Indian freedom struggle because there's not quote unquote race. You can have one people's freedom struggle. So, what do you do in a country where there's no people don't even you can't how are you supposed to even have one struggle for freedom when there already exists a difference between black freedom and white freedom?
But it's just the
Exactly.
conundrums that yeah.
And then I feel like, well, the reason why I think that's really helpful today is because if you were to define it, white freedom essentially, if you were to define it, is a freedom that necessitates the existence of an unfree people. White freedom is which is that's a paradox. It's hypocrisy. So there's essentially white freedom is not freedom, right? Unless you want to insist that white freedom depends on and the unfreeness of another people. Black freedom is complete freedom, including even freedom for people who think they're free, like basically non-black people in America. Right. And the reason why I think that's really important is because Baldwin also distinguishes between a government versus the people who govern, like the ruling, like the difference between a government and the rulers who are governing. Because what Baldwin is basically saying is that the roadblock to one people's freedom struggle, or even the existence of one people who can carry out a freedom struggle, is the fake quote unquote race, like the deliberate concept of race in order to even divide the concept of freedom itself, so that there's not one freedom, but there's black freedom and white freedom, like real complete freedom and like a freedom that necessitates an unfree people. Right. And that's not even in America. It's why you have empire. You can only have America, like a superpower, if it necessitates the underdevelopment of the world, or like the exploitation of the world. Okay, the reason why I think that's important for like today is because if you think about it, the people who are defending, in some ways, the newness of the moment is that whole number of 70% of people believe the system itself should change, is reflecting what Baldwin said. In some ways, if you use Baldwin's concept or language, is that the people who are most in defense of white freedom are not actually white people completely anymore. It's the ruling elite. And the question is, can, let's say, the poor as the white poor in particular, the white workers, they clearly are not in defense of white freedom anymore, because they realize that actually white freedom isn't real freedom. Like, this isn't a free country, this isn't a democratic country, it's an unfree. There's a sense that they are giving the 70% poll is the sense that this is an unfree system, a system that, in Jeremiah's language, like broke a social contract, let's say. But the question is, when Baldwin says white people becoming black, it means that they understand that black freedom is complete freedom. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And that's why I think Baldwin's language is important. Like, he doesn't, like, within the language itself is the understanding of a contradiction, like a society completely under contradiction.
Yeah.
And it makes a difference in, let's say, an individual person's life. Because for me, like, do you believe you're free or not? Like, do you actually believe you're free? Because black people know that. You know what I mean? And that makes a huge difference. And for a long time, white people truly believed they were free. But to believe you're free necessitates the unfreedom. Like, it necessitates you being in defense of a system that is unfree, that has unfreedom. Which is also why Baldwin says, like, he says this thing where he's like, to recognize the necessity for freedom of black people, which is the freedom of all people who live in this country, means that you have to completely reprioritize everything you think the system should be dependent on. So that instead of being on the side of Israel, you would be on the side of the Arabs. They completely reorient, like, basically it's a moral reorientation, human reorientation. And I don't know, I just feel like that's important to say.
Well, like the irony that Baldwin draws out is he's like, black people are the only people, have been the only people in this country who want to be free.
Yes.
And the iron, and I feel like always the counterintuitive thing that Baldwin does is like flip the thing where he's like, actually, in some ways, white people, not just in terms of material terms, but I think he's basically talking about spiritual terms. He's like, white people are the greatest victims of white supremacy at the end of the day. And like, I think that was in some ways the revolutionary, like, that was the revolutionary, like, almost question that he placed on the table at the basically during the Black Freedom Movement, which was that it was white people who, operating under basically this false notion of freedom, were actually the most enslaved, psychologically even, to a system which was not free. And because I think that's part of the important part where it's like, even if you have two kind of coexisting social systems or social system within the social system, ultimately it's all part of the same like country. It's all part of the same society. And so I think that's part of also like where Baldwin uniquely, also like theoretically, like you're saying, Baldwin is maybe the most important theorist for understanding how the contradictions of a society manifest in the individual, and how it basically rips individuals apart. And as a result, how that also impacts like their relationships with one another. But yeah, I just feel like the whole irony of like, yeah, it's like actually it's white people who are the most enslaved in a way, like not like physically enslaved, but almost in their consciousness enslaved. And that actually it's like black people, like the gift, and in some ways the challenge that the Black Freedom Movement put on the table was like, yeah, do Americans really want to be free? Like, do they want to be free? And I think Baldwin wasn't sure. He wasn't sure if the vast majority of Americans wanted to be free or if they just wanted to basically exist within a certain status quo, and be told basically what to think or how to think and all that.
Can I add something? Because I actually think this speaks to what people have said and also the significance of the celebration of Baldwin's birthday. Lately, I've been reflecting a lot actually on my high school experience. And to what Grace was saying earlier, this is in New York City. And it's like, I think statistics have come out that it's like the top public high school in the country in terms of the number of students it sends to elite colleges, like the percentage. And I appreciated actually, Grace, what you said earlier, because as I've been reflecting on my high school experience, and the reason why I've been doing it is because I think for a long time it was hard to reflect on that experience. But for context, it's this like very, I don't know, for some reason, like it's the top high school in New York City. Yeah, Stuyvesant in New York City, and it's located in
Magnet?
I don't even know what a magnet is, but apparently they called it the specialized. It's like the admissions for colleges are the SATs, and so the admissions for these public high schools are called the SHSATs. So essentially the precursor to the SATs. And it's been significant in the sense of this high school is interesting in that it might look similar to this room, where you had Asians, you had white people, you had, I mean, Asians in terms of Chinese Americans, Korean Americans, Indian Americans. And the one factor is that it rarely had Black people. But you had this mix of New York City. And it would be a mix of like wealthy, like the children of wealthy kids, but then you also had a large children of the immigrant community. And actually it's probably and I've been talking to a high school friend of mine, and I've been noticing actually how toxic that environment is. Because people do talk about Stuyvesant and how it's competitive and how it's whatever it is, but I don't think they really get to the root of the issue, which is that essentially everyone going to this school or these specialized high schools, of which Stuyvesant is a part of, is aspiring to whiteness. And we're not all white people. We're this group. And for the longest time, I was like, oh, like race, like what's race, right? Because I grew up in New York City. I grew up went to Stuyvesant, then I went to Cornell, another place that had a bunch of non-white people. And so I thought, like, yeah, that there was no such thing as aspiring to whiteness. But actually, in all of these places, like these places of elite institutions and academic trainings, there is such thing as whiteness, where essentially people, like one, Stuyvesant was also very racially divided. You had the cool white people, you had the less cool white people, you had the cool Chinese people or Asians, and you also had the less cool. It was just divided, right? And then, and it was intensely competitive, where it was known that at Stuyvesant it would be hard for you to get into an elite institution or one of the tops, right? You know, the Harvards, the Yales, the UPenns, because you are one Chinese person among so many Chinese people, and there's already that thing. And so people, even though it wasn't like, you know, people tried to play it cool, like, or some people tried to play it cool. Some people were like, oh, I'm not one of those Asians. I'm one of the cool ones, but also smart. And so there was this thing that you're always like, there's this thing going on, which is that everyone was your competitor.
Yeah.
And everyone was your enemy. And and I say this thing because it's actually representative of the psyche of America, where Americans sees China as an enemy. America sees Russia as an enemy. America sees all these places, instead of saying that, oh, like, how great is it that these countries have developed something for the benefit of humanity? Instead, it's a competition. And yeah, like for many of us, I mean, Stuyvesant is just one sample size of I mean, the schools that we come from, or whatever it is in this country. But yeah, I think for many of us, free school is also different in that it wasn't people of different civilizations coming together. Or, I mean, I don't think Stuyvesant was a coming together, but you know, but you had that appearance of diversity. But for many of us here, it's the first time where we're not brought together by these white standards. There's a greater principle, and yeah, I think, I mean, okay, I won't go there. But I think what's significant about free school is we're representative of a world house that King was speaking to, where it's the best of civilizations. It's people coming together, not mediated by whiteness, not mediated by white standards and aspirations. And yeah, like we turn to the Black tradition that has seen the world and the contributions of all people, but the positive contributions for humanity. And I think that's what we're trying to do with Baldwin and the celebration too, which is with the concert. Well, one, the basis being the Black freedom struggle. What is that social system, and what are those aspirations, and what is that the achievement of Black people in this country, and how that has led to the world, to Africa, to Asia, to those liberation struggles and civilizations. And that's the spirit, I believe, that we're trying to create, because, yeah, it is true that America is a new nation where for a long time people have not talked to each other because of whiteness, and not seen each other because of whiteness. And it's sort of what you were saying earlier, which is that we won't know the a priori conditions until the people have come together to talk and to work things out unmediated by whiteness. And I mean, it's been interesting because we're now, and we'll probably go into the event preparations, but we're now in the phase of, reaching out to people to say this is the 100th birthday of James Arthur Baldwin, and he stood for these principles. And like, why is it that free school is the only institute, or I mean, organization of the people that is celebrating someone like Baldwin? Like, where are the public institutions? And
DC Public Library is doing something. That's exciting.
yeah.
Called James Baldwin Centennial Celebration. They're just screening iMovie. Oh yeah, Baldwin.
Did Jimmy Burns?
Allegedly.
What a shame. Well, speaking of documentaries, so our event is next week. It's coming up, actually it's less than 1 week, and we have flyers, which Jane and Ryan should take before they leave.
I got him.
There's, so next Friday, August 2nd is from 5 to 8 p.m. That's the first day of our event. That's Baldwin's 100th birthday. And we're going to screen, it'll be the world premiere of another Saturday Free School original documentary, which we wrote and are producing, called To Fulfill the Unfulfilled, To Answer the Unanswered, the Revolutionary James Baldwin. And so it'll be probably around a 30 to 40-minute film, unless we go over. But it's definitely less than an hour. And then we'll have a roundtable discussion on the Revolutionary James Baldwin. And the documentary, like Doc, you can add in, but the documentary is pretty exciting because, like, it's basically, we wrote the script, but it's also full of music that we in Free School listen to, and is, honestly, it's going to be really exciting to put together. But the whole, the documentary is essentially about the unanswered question of what I would consider the unanswered question of humanity, but it's the conundrum of America, which is, how is it that even after the emancipation of slaves, Black people are still not free? And meaning that all Americans, so-called Americans in this country, are not free. And so how can there be this existence of unfreedom? And we trace it back to the chronology.
Just
sorry.
if you don't mind, I don't think in working on this documentary, I think at the same time we're adding a new quality, a new substance to the year of Baldwin. I don't think starting out that in March, February we started, that ideologically and philosophically we were where we are now. And it kind of took all the experiences since to bring us to this point. And this documentary entitled To Fulfill the Unfulfilled, To Answer the Unanswered, the Revolutionary James Baldwin. And this idea of fulfillment and answering is a way to establish Baldwin as a revolutionary thinker. The key to this is that if everything has already been answered, if all the answers are out there and we just need to embrace and appropriate them, well, you don't need Baldwin. If democracy has been fulfilled, you don't need Baldwin. So to fulfill, and this is, I think, is an apt way of presenting who he is and his striving and that work and that commitment to fulfill the unfulfilled, and to answer the unanswered. And so we roughly worked on this script. I had given up on it because my brain locked up on me, and Serafina and Emily said, no, we got to do this. And I think we did it. I think we have a script that does precisely what a documentary script should do. And I agree with you. It is a theory. I think it will be taken as a theoretical achievement. And it's not a lot of theoretical talk, but it will do something different. The other thing is there are multiple moving parts in it. There's the narrative, which we're going, and we're trying to be as technically good as we can. This is not the work of amateurs, or at least we don't want to be viewed as amateurs. This is the work of people who are striving for professional quality. You know what I'm saying? And so we're going to along with Crystal, do the narrative tomorrow. And the audio has to be at that level. But the other moving parts are the music. And I think the music will be new music for most people and even for most of us. Everything from Max Roach to Marvin Gaye to Duke Ellington to, I can't name all of the people, but it's this music that emphasizes the narrative. And then the third part are the photos and clips. And I think, that has, so I hope the editing people are really, but it ends on a note with Baldwin singing Precious Lord, Take My Hand, and Sweet Honey in the Rock singing We Are Climbing Jacob's Ladder. So it is Baldwin, it is the Black freedom movement, it is the cultural revolution that accompanied the Black. So I think this is something that people should see and people will see even going forward. I just want to say, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Emily.
No, that's perfect. And so that'll be 5 to 8 at the Church of that's the first day at the Church of the Crucifixion. And then the second day will be, also, the other thing I just want to say about the documentary is I think the documentary has heavily shaped basically all aspects of the event.
Yeah.
The art exhibit,
Yes.
even the concert and the narrative. And I think in some ways it's been our not first, because I think the first attempt was the science symposium, but I think it's been our first explicit attempt to define what do we mean when we say James Baldwin is a revolutionary.
That's right. And that's the question. Because otherwise he can be dismissed and trivialized.
Mm-hmm.
But if he is a revolutionary in these times, it is more than important.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, maybe you should say, we have to deal with this question of chronologies, which we've been talking about. And this is very important in the documentary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but no spoilers because we don't want to reveal the plot.
Okay, we don't want to spoil it.
And then, the second day, Saturday, August 3rd, from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. will be, in some ways, this great opening, because I kind of think of 3 days as like a large exhale. And so the Afro-Asiatic Peace Concert is the second day from 2 to 8 p.m. at the Church of the Crucifixion. So also same location as day one. And here's the program. We have Zumbi Soweto, his group called Tahimba African Drum and Dance Ensemble, first performing, and they'll pour libations for Baldwin, kind of this invocation of Baldwin, followed by part 1 of the concert entitled Take Me to the Water. And under Take Me to the Water, Serafina will perform, Osiris Wildfire, who is a folk singer, who's performed at other events, he'll be performing along with his bass player, Daryl. And then Bobby Zankel's Wonderful Sound 7. Part 2, The Last White Nation, is titled The Last White Nation.
Tell them why we have these titles, by the way.
Okay, I think this is Herbert's expertise.
Oh,
yeah.
I should.
Yes.
But, I guess in the first section with Osiris and Bobby and also Serafina singing, we wanted to talk about, we're talking about the revolutionary James Baldwin, and I think the set of essays that compose No Name in the Street are in some ways an articulation, the most precise articulation of that revolutionary James Baldwin, where he's looking at the American revolutionary process and locating the Black freedom struggle at the center of it, and also suggesting that this is where the future will emerge from. And he's dealing with King's assassination, and he's dealing with what might be possible. This question that we've been talking about today about capacity. What is the capacity of the American people going forward, even from this point of great betrayal, which was the assassination of King? And so in this section, I think philosophically what we are trying to say also is that it's that aspect of the struggle.
What is the title of this first
Take me
section?
to the water.
Take Me to the Water.
Right.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No. I mean, I think
Could you explain why we have given these titles to the three sections?
that's what I'm attempting to do, but we'll also sit down and work it out a little more concretely before the event. But I can say how I see it, and I've said this before. I've always struggled with these essay titles because they are from the Bible. I'm not familiar, but then I do think "Take Me to the Water" and "To Be Baptized" really talk about the emergence of a new human being bathed in almost like the faith in God or believe in God's love, but then you can also see that as the revolutionary moral imperative. So, with Bobby performing in this, that avant-garde jazz, it's that call for the new human being to emerge from what already exists, and how do we achieve that? So that's sort of how I see this section. Will obviously work out and make it more concrete from quotes from Baldwin and so on and so forth. But it's basically, again, the assertion that you cannot separate Baldwin from the Black Freedom Movement, and B, the Black Freedom Movement is where the American Revolutionary process became inherited from. So that, and then the second part is called The Last White Nation, and in this we have the Korean dancers, the dance ensemble. We have the Philadelphia Chinese Opera Society. You should say a little more about the performance. And when we have Serafina, we have the Palestinian dancers, Malika Al-Dabka, and we also have a duet between Soni Tanuka and Bobby Zankel. And in this section, and Emily can speak a little more to the performances, but in this section, what we want to say is really that the idea that this nation was ever white or could ever be white is just one of those blatant historical lies or myths that needs to be busted in this moment, because the survival of the nation literally depends on it. And it's not even that we have all these Asian civilizations represented in the sections, because I don't like the word multiculturality, or it doesn't capture what we are trying to capture. It's not just that we want to show diversity, but we want to show that there's something in the tradition of the Afro-Asiatic people that can inform and lead the peace movement going forward. It can, so two things. First, the idea that this nation was never white, and so the myth of white supremacy needs to die in this moment, but then also the answer to what might be possible coming from an Afro-Asiatic tradition, coming from, the spirit of Bandung, coming from the spirit of the anti-colonial struggles, and central, the Black freedom struggle in Baldwin. So that's sort of, do you want to say a little bit about the dancers?
Also, like what you were saying about Bandung and the anti-colonial struggle, it's also Baldwin, along with King and the leaders of the Black freedom struggle, they understood that their revolutionary, democratic, emancipatory task places the Black freedom struggle alongside the world anti-colonial movement. Yeah. And that's just in addition to what you're saying. And yeah, because in some ways we thought we knew what these sections were going to be, but then it changed along with the performers. But in some ways that's beautiful, because the performers' eager participation also shaped the evidence of that in some ways these performers are evidence that this is what you said. I'm just repeating what you're saying, Doc. It's evidence that this is not a white nation. Like, it's not a white nation. Look at where so much of the original and creative energy and music, we have all these civilizations in this country already. So why is there still such a pervasive need to cling on to and perpetuate the myth of a white nation? And in fact, that there is, like, especially in these times, especially with Malika Al-Dabka and the Palestinian participation, there is a movement within the American people to, just like the Black freedom struggle had said, that our place in the world belongs with humanity, not with empire. And so I think that's also helped shape the performance. But so yeah, the Korean traditional dance of Chumnuri I'm really excited about, because they're traveling from 2 hours away. Like we have the two groups that are coming from far away are Chumnari and Malika Al-Dabka, like the Palestinians, and who are coming from DC. And the Korean traditional dance of Chumnari sent me their music already. And what's interesting is it's very different music than what we've heard from. It's a very different dance than what we've seen from even the school of Southern New Jersey, because the teacher of this school, she has dedicated her life to the craft of Korean traditional dance. And yeah, I think she's a really beautiful person. But I wanted to pull up the dance descriptions because they're performing three different dances. The first is a group dance called Ipchum Sogo, and Ipchum just means like folk dance, I'm pretty sure. Because I had to Google this. Ipchum just means, I don't know, I'm looking to you.
I don't.
Ipchum just means like folk, it's a term for folk dance. And Sogo is, she says, Sogo is a tabor like small drum that is used towards the end of the dance to release the energy. Considered as the basis of the traditional Korean dance, it requires three major principles: reservation, liveliness, and expressive hand and body gesture. It is originally a freestyle dance with no promised sequence, and is rather danced in any way a performer wants. The second dance is a solo. The dance teacher is doing a solo dance, and it's called Hwasyeon Mugok, and it's an original dance she choreographed. And Hwa means flower, which is also the same word in Chinese. Son means line, and Mu means dance. Guk is song. It's a contemporary dance repertoire based on traditional movements that imitate traditional Korean brush artwork. The artwork expresses freedom and beauty of the mountains, rivers, forests, other sceneries of the land of Korea. Yeah. And then the third is called long drum dance. The Janggu dance is very energetic and rhythmic. The drums called Janggu are double-headed and shaped like an hourglass. What is it? Oh, sorry. The Changgu is played by striking the surface with the palm on the left side with a bamboo drumstick on the right. Dancers dance while beating the drums strapped to their bodies. In an artful fusion of music and choreography, the dancers dance and spin around, playing vibrant yet graceful rhythms. So it's three new dances.
It'll be really nice to have the folk peasant tradition of Korean dance.
Other than the folk tradition.
Yeah.
And then, oh yeah. So and then and then the next group is the Philadelphia Chinese Opera Society, which is actually based in Chinatown. So it's our first time having Chinese people based in Chinatown perform at our event. And they're really excited, and they're going to perform four different repertoires, which Michelle actually was familiar with some of them. Wow. Yeah, you were. Okay, so they're performing Ode to the Pear Blossom, Sword Dance from Farewell My Concubine, and Farewell My Concubine is arguably the most famous Peking opera that the West is familiar with. Because as part of fundraising for the Chinese struggle against the Japanese, lots of Peking opera singers came to the West to try to raise funds, and that's when Paul Robeson met a lot of the Chinese people from China. And then Paul Robeson helped them fundraise for their struggle by singing March of the Volunteers, which later became the Chinese national anthem. And that's how Paul Robeson became really involved with the Chinese struggle. And then the third performance is Ribbon Dance from the Flower Fairy. And Ribbon Dance is it's really crazy because the sleeves are long ribbons, and the movement make sure that the ribbons do not that they're not wrapping themselves in the ribbon. So it's all about movement and the technique. And then the fourth will be, I think it's also about a concubine. Lady Mu Guiying takes command. So they're really excited to perform, and like I said last week, I was a little nervous about them performing because I thought we'd have to pay because they seem very professional, and when I called the lady, she was like, "No, we'll do it for free." And let me see. Okay, and then Safina, Malika al-Dabka, which means Queens of Dabka. Okay, part 3 is to crush a serpent.
Well, to crush a serpent, I mean, this really would be like the climax of the narrative, but also the piece concert. And I think, and we'll work out how exactly we want to frame it, but I think it should again highlight the assassination of the king, and that being almost like we were saying today, a betrayal of a promise or a possibility for the American people at large. And then we want to clarify what the serpent is, and what is the poison that's being injected into American society. Again, being this white supremacist social system or a psyche that just cannot see a human being as a human being, not just in this country, but anywhere in the world. And, in this section, we have Fuad and Fairuz Foti, the Palestinian artists. I think Fuad plays the oud, and Fairuz is going to do an opera, opera, Puccini opera that she basically adapted for the Palestinians.
Yes.
So then, that and a duet between Alfie Pollitt and Jalil Shah. Oh no, I forgot Ramya. So Ramya is also, so these are the three. So we have Fuad and Feroz Foti, we have Ramya Shankaran, who's performed Indian classical dance at a lot of our events, and she synthesizes that classical Indian tradition with elements of the Black Freedom Struggle. So for instance, this time she's going to redo, I think it's going to be a little different because she's developed it since she did it at the Robeson Honorable Elijah Muhammad celebration, but it's adapted from Maya Angelou's poem, I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings. And then we have Alfie and Jalil, and all of this, we basically it feels like a call for the revolutionary struggle to be taken up once again to crush the serpent, to achieve the American nation, and and also with the thing that we are really working towards collectively being peace, being substantive freedom, and the democratic struggle of the people. I think that's all I want to say about this right now. But yeah, it should be great. It's going to be, and I forgot to say that part of the narrative or the MC script will also be Serafina singing before. So you have a narrative that's, I guess you have a prosaic narrative, and then you have a musical narrative of what we are trying to say also. So yeah.
And we've assembled a very large tech team to manage the sound. Like, we're really expanding our tech repertoire by connecting in order to suit all the microphones, we're probably gonna connect 2 soundboards together.
Don't worry.
Yeah. And so we're gonna make sure the sound in this space is good. And we're not going to live stream the concert. I don't think we're gonna live stream. Actually, no. Well, definitely the concert we won't live stream. We'll see about the others, but instead, what we're aiming to do is doing a high recording of especially the music, the sound, for posterity.
Because live streaming compromises the sound quality. So we want the highest sound quality that we can get, and the highest lighting quality.
Oh yeah. Crystal's on the lights. Yeah. And then last day of the event is Monday, August 5th, 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. at the Free Library, the central branch of the Free Library. So in the lobby we'll have the official opening of the art exhibit that Kathy, Nuri, Blaze, Shambarta, Manasvi have all been working on. Serafina, I guess myself. But have been doing, and the exhibit will be up for, I think, 2 months. And so the official opening will consist of brief remarks celebrating James Baldwin's centenary at the Free Library, as well as performances by Zumbi's group again and Osiris Wildfire.
I don't know.
Huh?
I spoke to Cyrus on Monday. He was, I think I'm doing Saturday.
No, he's doing both days.
I'm trying to imply that.
I texted him. Yeah.
I think so.
And then the exhibit is titled Love and Revolution, James Baldwin Speaks to Our Time. But yeah, Kathy, maybe you can talk about, you can go over the exhibit and the sections and the meaning, because on the main part of the program on Monday, besides the performers, which will be very triumphant, will be a very close guided tour of the exhibit, which I think is important because actually the exhibit's really deep.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I just wanted to say it's obviously been an exhibit that's been a long time coming. We originally conceptualized a very, very grandiose vision, and then we realized very quickly like there's a very actually specific purpose to celebrating Baldwin's birthday through all these concepts that we're starting to develop in Free School with the sort of velocity that we had sort of coalesced around the science conference, especially around, I feel like the thrust of the exhibition as it's now, emerged. There happens to be two cases once you walk up to the second floor of the Free Library in front of their social sciences department. And that will be where the exhibition will be held, as well as some other like didactic and materials around it to frame it. But two cases, I feel like major themes that help us, I feel like, really understand not only Baldwin's life in and of itself, but also his autobiography being rooted in the Middle Passage and slavery, and also the South, which actually is the autobiography of the whole American people. You cannot really understand yourself as an American unless you understand yourself in the auction block. And in some ways, so that's the first problem. Maybe go into that some. Of course, I've kind of been jumping. I'm already going to jump around a little, but just like that being a really important starting place, and then also the continuation of that autobiography naturally leads you to also see yourself in like Black Reconstruction, as we were talking about today, and also the Great Migration. And so that is how you have to be able to understand like Baldwin's two parents from two different parts of the South arriving in Harlem in the early 1900s, meeting and then well, I say two parents because he was shaped by like a father from like Louisiana and a mother from Maryland, even though that was his biological father. Either way, I think the next chapter, going through like the Great Migration forward is actually also the Harlem Renaissance. In many ways, also knowing that Baldwin was nurtured by a very, very unique but important like anchorage in what was the natural strivings intellectually, morally, spiritually of Harlem and all of these artists and philosophers at the time, but also, and then we will, I think, take that first case to develop these ideas plus his like growing up, but also and joining, but also leaving the church, for example, as one. So we've centered a lot of these key points as being the sort of like these major like moral choices that shape Baldwin's like moral choices, like joining but also leaving the church. Becoming a writer is another section. Becoming a writer through the gift that I think meeting Buford Delaney and the gift of being able to truly see reality as we've been talking about. And then that fourth sort of choice in that first section will be going to Paris, which I think is an extension of all those choices, but leaving America to be able to write about America. And that's where, of course, he finishes his first novel, Go Tell on a Mountain, listening to Bessie Smith in the Alps, listening to her 2 albums over and over again, finally putting forth a book that he had been working on for 10 years. But then it was also the fifth section, I believe, of that case will be seeing the photo of Dorothy Counts, hearing about the Montgomery bus boycotts, realizing that he has to go back to America and that America's changing. He has to be part of what is taking place there. He has to be part of, he cannot just like stand on the sidelines. He has to return home to be with his own family, but in some ways become, and that's where actually what picks up as the second case being completely centered on the Black freedom struggle. And I feel like this echoes, again, I just want to say I'm really indebted to like everything that the documentary, and also to another extent like the concept, especially the documentary, for being able to, I think, start to articulate what this really means, because I think it is, again, like a highly elevated, I think, enterprise from what kinds of exhibitions we've done before for a lot of different reasons. To push aside even the idea that this is a new kind of like institutional partnership with the library, that we've usually done our own exhibitions, but this has fit. The real thing is that it's a theoretically and like ideologically, I think, very, very sharp, I think, crystallization of all the things we're working through. Like one that like the second case, the second section, however you want to call it, has to assert that the Black freedom struggle is the American Revolution. And we do go into that like sense of what makes it the American Revolutionary process, but also you can't, and people have managed to do this, like divorce Baldwin from King, divorce Baldwin from the Civil Rights Movement, divorce Baldwin from like not just being like, witness, but actually like an active participant in it. And so, we have a section dedicated to even like those beautiful passages, or even those moments that he's written so beautifully and lucidly about, in terms of what it meant for him to go to South as like a person who was born to two Southern parents and come home, but also meet these very noble and beautiful people who he never forgot. And then a section that truly, I think, like elevates and tries to capture like King as the father of a new nation and of this movement, and what Baldwin was able, like Baldwin being that logical, theoretical extension of King. And then even to some degree also talk a great deal about like Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X, and how important that, like witnessing the Nation of Islam is to to Baldwin's process. And then, of course, I think one of the parts where we had to work very hard to also, I think, capture is what the assassination of King, but also Malcolm, Medgar, Baldwin, just like the beheading, I think, of this movement did in some ways. And that's why I think when you all read like of course Take Me to the Water to be baptized in the Central Park Free Library, it's helped me a great deal to sit in on those sessions to figure out how to talk about this, because the answer is really not that deep. Like it was very painful. It was very like, it was such a deep wound, but in many ways we had to conclude once we walked like with the notion that Baldwin never gave up. Like he continued writing for the almost 2 decades after King's assassination, writing and conception and trying to like bear witness, and without King, how do you move forward? Which is, I think, how we kind of end up leaving the exhibition on this triumphant note of our task for today, our responsibility to take this up, love as the central, like I think we talked about love as the central, the central force or weapon necessary for us to take up the American Revolution struggle in this moment. And I didn't mention at the very beginning, we'll have like a curatorial statement printed out, of course, on a foam board, but at the very end, we'll actually bring it back home here to Philadelphia to what we're doing in the year of Baldwin, and say, like, now that you've walked through the exhibition, you know that there is a very important task, but you're not going to have to do this alone, because here's the Saturday Free School reading Baldwin here in the city and celebrating Baldwin, and here are photos of our reading groups. This is the literacy campaign that in many ways has helped it is what is like one of the few efforts to equate and also like see yourselves and to live by Baldwin in, I guess, the lives of ordinary people in Philadelphia. We invite you to join. And so, I mean, I didn't even get into the fact that like the partnership with the library will like, help also, I think, not only flesh out like the fact that we'll have art, we'll print out art and images and photos that we believe really, really help tell the story, right? The captions that we think that really like sew all of this together, but also partnership with the Free Library has allowed us to also lend or borrow their original first edition copies of like important Baldwin books, as well as like materials like a Gordon Parks like photojournalistic book that I think showcases like King and like the Nation of Islam and what did Baldwin see. So like we have and then for Delaney, like exhibition catalog opened up to like a portrait of Baldwin. So like we have a lot of different ways to I think utilize the case to its absolute maximum capacity. I don't think we were getting some feedback at a certain point of like, won't you think this is a little too full? I mean, we can try to be more concise, but we can't go back on the message. I think we're trying to tell. Yeah, exactly. And so I don't know. I've certainly probably simplified a lot of this, and I really am hoping that anybody else who's working on this exhibition like can fill in some details that I might have missed out. But I think actually in our conversation right just this moment, hearing how this will be like the third day to this like the celebration of Baldwin, starting from like the documentary screening on Friday, the concert on Saturday, really helps me like actually envision what this will really look like, because I think we all feel that we've been working very like diligently on our different parts, but actually to see it like in its full breath is like actually very, very refreshing, and I'm getting excited about it all over again. And also just that the title is like Love and Revolution. That is like really, really I want more like love and freedom. No.
Yes, that's right. You should come on.
Why don't I think you suggested the title. Is that right?
Because somehow,
It is right.
freedom sometimes is not understood as the revolutionary struggle, but as some kind of personal freedom.
Right.
So, so we had to accentuate the revolutionary cause, the revolutionary moment, the revolutionary struggle.
Yeah, I just want to put on top of it because of the theoretical advancements that we're making about Baldwin. It also explains how much more we have yet to do and how much we really have yet to come to.
Yeah.
Because I was telling Doc like a couple weeks ago, honestly, in the following year, like I don't see a reason why we couldn't celebrate King in a similar way that we're celebrating Baldwin. But that's something to say later. But the thing that I was like doing this morning before free school started was like how looking for trying to help the documentary and looking for different clips of Baldwin speaking, and I wanted to emphasize what you're saying about Baldwin as a witness for King. And in his conversation with Maya Angelou, he was talking about having to write No Name in the Street, which is also something we've been reading in the free library, which has been like revealing everything to a certain extent of why Baldwin is a revolutionary, and how he explains so much, like we were talking about with his language or whatever. And the thing that he had told Maya was like, well, was in a story. He said a story because he wrote No Name in the Street out of a personal obligation. And then he said he knows that David had come to him. I forget where he was writing No Name in the Street. He mentioned where, but I forget now. And then he said David had come to him because he knows when James is in trouble, like emotionally trying to like, you know what I mean? So David asked Baldwin like, hey, are you ready to send No Name to the Street to the publisher? And then Baldwin was like, yes. But then David was like, well, you don't have any envelopes, so how could you send it? And so David had sent it, and then what Baldwin, or what James, because they're both Baldwin, had recognized out of that back and forth or that scenario is what you had said, or what you're saying about how to move forward beyond the assassination of King or the incoming counter-revolution from the Black Freedom Movement. And Baldwin was like, what that showed me is that I had to keep the faith. And it also seems like there's going to be a lot more to uncover through what Baldwin's choices, I guess, and actually how he viewed his
Actually, what?
how he viewed his contribution. Because the other thing was in a conversation with Nikki Giovanni, he was saying, well, I'm a kind of poet, which is also a way, like, it seems like he's explaining himself to a new generation of writers, which is the conversation in and of itself. Black women writers, Black male writers. It's a whole, like, what did the inheritors of the Black freedom movement do? I guess with Baldwin or whatever, right? But she was saying, like, I'm a kind of poet to Nikki, and you know that whole thing of like, well, in my image, in my vision is the child, you know, and whenever they need me, I'm there. Or that whole sentiment, which is emotional and true. And like how you had explained, well, yes, it's like something about, there's this something about preschool or something about what we're doing. But what I would want to say is that there is something that we're trying to excavate. That is something new about Baldwin, something new about the revolutionary process. That is like, that I guess the documentary or the exhibit or even the concert will help bring a language to.
Celebration with a revolutionary purpose, not just a celebration. And this is because I know with Emily, we're always looking at these other places. New York Public Library got all the money, so on and so forth. But with all the money, there is no purpose. There's no revolutionary anchorage, no call upon the people. And that's what Emily and Purple was saying in the concert, is a call to the people, art calling upon the people, giving hope to the people. This is so very, very important. And I can tell just a small, very small thing. You know, I met with a leader of the Carpenters Union yesterday, and they're going to help fund our effort and want to help fund us going forward. And in that meeting was the mayor of Philadelphia, and she said, "Oh, I want to be here. I must be at this concert." And so I'm hoping, but my point is a call to the people,
Right.
not just to a few intellectual elites, and respect for the people. This is huge. And I think, you know, everything that we're doing, and we're not yet there. We're getting there. We're moving forward. And we don't know how well we've done our job until next weekend. But let us, you know, remain purposeful, keep our eye focused, don't be distracted. And I think the people are going to find their way to what we're doing. And as they say, put a lot of respect on our name and our purpose and the ideas that we're trying to manifest. But it's a great thing. It's a great.
I think so.
And then nobody else in this country is doing it. And this is not to put pride on ourselves, but to ask, why not? Why the fuck not? I can't understand this. Baldwin, everybody acknowledges him as a great guy and, you know, all this, that, and the other, but you can't do nothing.
Right.
But anyways.
No. Okay, maybe I have a few announcements for post live stream. Okay, so is there anything else that we should say? Okay, go. Do comments.
Okay. It was just people at the beginning saying good morning mostly. M. Sparks said good morning and also added, Donald Trump said that he would end the Ukraine war ASAP, and that was the last straw for the shattered deep state. So BlackRock put out the target to hit Trump. So he's saying Trump put out Trump said he would end the Ukraine war ASAP, and that was the last straw for the deep state.
Oh, yeah.
And so they put out the target on Trump. And then said 100 emoji fact from Ontario. And then Jacob Carpenter says good morning from Los Lunas, New Mexico. Niagara Media says, hey y'all, I was family, I'll watch the recording. On commenting says the debate was incredibly painful for Biden. I almost felt bad for him. I added that almost emphasis. And then I don't know, the Chinese person added something in Chinese, I don't know. I'm just muttering under my breath.
Oh, please do it.
No.
At the end of sentence.
Well, some things are more important.
Oh.
Thanks, Kathy.
Subtext and text. Okay, well, we're going to end our live stream now. So, thanks everyone for. This says I'm not Chinese.
Oh.
It's just he's not Chinese.
Oh, sorry.
And so, thanks to all of our commenters, and then after the event, we're going to meet back at the teacher prescription.
Yeah, the 9th August, no?
Oh. Okay, so
Right after.
okay, so everyone keep updated on where we'll
Yes,
be in preschool after the event, and then we'll go back to. Okay, but anyways, bye everyone. Bye.